Hi guys, this is the Casual Fan. Welcome to the second edition of the Casual F1 podcast. Now, before we begin, I wanted to have a slight chat with you guys. Now, the reason why I started this channel was primarily to air my views about the sport that I love. That was the primary objective of me doing something like this. But since the channel has grown a bit, now I'm at 1200 subscribers, I thought it was about time that I started diversifying the content. And when it comes to diversifying the content, the aim was to present a more diversified set of views. So, yeah, for that, the podcast came into the picture. When it comes to the podcast, I wanted to have a long form chat with arguably different content creators and try to inculcate those views as well in the kind of content that I create. Now, in the second episode, we have Peter Brook with us. Now, Peter, well, he's been doing this for more than 2.5 years now. I've been following him since last season. He's grown at a quite impressive pace. He has around 18,000 subscribers now. The content that he produces, it's quite detail oriented and something that as a hardcore fan, yeah, even though my name is a casual fan, something as a hardcore fan I love to watch. There are a few videos that I have almost kept it bookmark and I tend to go back to them. So yeah, on that respect, I tend to love the kind of content that he puts out. So that was why I thought of having him on, discussing various burning topics that we have in Formula One right now, and see what his point of view is. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. Yeah, just a disclaimer: it's a bit of a long chat, around 2.5 hours. We didn't intend for it to be this long, but once we started discussing, one thought led to the other, and the conversation went on for far too long. But yeah, I've added a few timestamps which you can jump from one to another and pick up the topics that interest you. But yeah, overall, it was a fun discussion, at least for me. I hope you guys enjoy it as well. So let's get straight to it. The very second episode of the Casual F1 podcast with Peter Brook. This is the Casual Fan, and welcome to the Casual F1 podcast, episode number 2. For this podcast, we have an upcoming YouTuber who's growing in numbers quite a breathtaking speed, to be honest, and something that has always left me a bit jealous because I've been following him com- making progress again and again, almost with every video that he does. In the last 1 year, I've seen him grow from basically just getting monetized to now having around 18,000 subscribers. Peter Brook. Peter, welcome to the Casual F1 podcast. How are you? And please give a brief introduction of, well, who you are, what you're doing, your YouTube channel, and, well, why are you here?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Peter Brook. So I am a content creator. I make history videos about Formula One. So I'm known for covering the more obscure side of it. So I cover a lot of backmarker teams and drivers, and I do very long form videos. So I've got a lot of stuff that's well over an hour long, and I like to do big kind of ranking videos and a lot of technical stuff as well about iconic cars and that sort of thing as well.
And okay, just a brief. I mean, just a suggestion for people like me who have not really, you know, won over the YouTube algorithm until now. What's the secret? What do you think has worked for you? To ultimately help you grow at such an impressive pace. I mean, having 18K subscribers, a dedicated audience. So, what's something that you feel you've done pretty well as compared to where other people tend to lose out?
I think perseverance, to be honest, because my channel I started making videos in 2020, so during the lockdown, and a lot of other people were the same, and they started channels around the same time. Some people maybe fell by the wayside because once we come out of lockdown, the viewership started going down, and maybe if they'd only got up to say 500 subscribers, they thought, well, I have to. It's taking too much time and effort now. I kind of just fully immersed myself and I was trying to be regular with uploading. And because my videos were a bit different, because I was going into such high detail on topics that hadn't been covered so much, that was getting people's attention. But it took about 18 months for me to get 1,000 subscribers, which is a relatively slow growth, especially since it took about 30 videos to get to that stage. But the main thing that kept
Mm.
me going was the fact that the comments I was getting were kind of overwhelmingly positive. And so I knew from that, it's like, even if I'm not getting very many views on these people obviously like what I'm doing. So if I keep that going, it will eventually keep growing, basically. And then
Yeah.
once it hit 1,000, suddenly the algorithm gave me a nice big push, and up it went. Um, and I've just kind of kept it going from that, really. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, my channel's still relatively small at 18,000 subs, because there are F1 YouTubers who've got 200,000, so a lot more than me, who've
For
obviously been
sure.
doing it a lot longer than that. So there's room for growth, but yeah, it's growing quite well now, and it's ended up becoming a full-time job when it was just a hobby.
Well, congratulations for that. At least from my side,
Yeah,
it's been impressive to see.
yeah.
So
Thank you.
yeah. So in your case, for your channel, a couple of videos that you would like to give as a recommendation, something that are close to your heart and that you'd actually want someone to watch.
I suppose too. Some of the ones I'm most proud of. Well, there's the recent one I did about the turbo era. That video is much more popular than I was expecting, but that's one that just is a purely technical video, just looking at the history of the turbo engines in the 70s and 80s. Um, and that one, it covers, it says all it needs to say, to be honest. It's just a straight historical facts video. There's a similar video looking at the original ground effect era, which I did about a year ago as well. But also last year I did a very, very long video about Vettel, which came out just before Abu Dhabi when it was his last race. So that's a 2-hour video basically covering his entire life and career. And then my very large ranking videos as well, covering every driver by decade. So the 90s drivers, I'm proud of that one, but it's over 3 hours long. So it's a very big slog, that one.
No, no. The thing is,
Mm.
what I've loved, to be honest, in case of your videos, first of all, it's the detail. Secondly, it's quite a few videos have been pretty much what anyone is looking for. In my case, the Sebastian Vettel video, it's something that stands out quite often. I've seen it and I was a bit depressed when Vettel was retiring. So that was something that I had a
Mm.
look. It was a nice way to remember what kind of a career that he had. So yeah, kudos to that. Now coming to the agenda, the topic of discussion of this podcast, the very second episode. So in the second episode, we are going to cover 5 different topics, basically the burning topics of this season at this current stage. So these topics will be, first of all, it will be the red flags, the issue of red flags that we had at Australia. Second will be the calendar. Stefano Domenicali has stated that there might be 25 races next season. We might even scale it up to 30 races. So, what's our view on that? The third will be the new regulations, whether they are a success or a failure. The fourth is, well, more teams in F1, the whole Andretti situation, and maybe a 12th team also knocking on the door. And finally, something that I have wanted to know, Peter Brook's fascination with Narain Karthikeyan, the first Indian F1 driver, and HRT. So let's start with the first one. Peter, well, you had a hit tweet recently. It was regarding a statistic where you specified the number of red flags over the years. So can you elaborate what was, first of all, what was the tweet about? Just to give a basic brief to our audience as well.
Yeah, so a few days ago, I put out a tweet, which I thought was a fairly innocuous one. It was just listing the number of red flags used in races by decade. And it ended up blowing up and getting over 7,000 likes, which is by far the most I've ever got, because I only have about 500 followers on Twitter. Um, a lot of people kind of got the wrong end of the stick of it, because so many people commented saying like, "Oh, now compare it against deaths by decade" or something. And I think they were taking it as me sort of ranting that we're using it too much or whatever. Because the thing is that in the 2020s we've already used 17 red flags, whereas in the 2010s there were six, or in the noughties there was six, and then the last decade there were about 20 or 21. So in 3 years we've already almost matched the last 10-year period. And there has
Yeah.
been a sharp increase. I understand that they're supposed to be used only in exceptional circumstances and
Mm.
purely for safety reasons, but some of them, there have been some very interesting decisions about whether or not it should or shouldn't be a red flag, I think. Particularly Australia. I mean, having 3 red flags in
Yeah.
one race was really not necessary, I don't think.
Yeah. Ideally, it should have been one, maximum. The one with the Alex Albon incident. I don't think we need the second one, to be fair.
Yeah, the second one caused the third one as
Yeah.
well.
I
The
mean,
first, I
oh,
mean, I was surprised. The one with the first one with Albon, it surprised me a bit because it took so long to make a decision on a red flag. Because normally, if you need a red flag, you'll know immediately, and they get called very quickly.
hmm.
But I mean, he was obviously there was bits of debris and there were gravel on the track, and he was just off the racing line. But a safety car, which they did originally, was perfectly warranted for that. I can't remember if
Hmm.
maybe they found out that the barriers had been damaged or something.
I think it
But
was
it
the
was a very
barriers.
very late
The
call on a
way
red
Albon
flag, and
hit.
obviously that annoyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing actually. I suppose is one explanation is because we have Tech Pro barriers now, which are designed to deform. Is that if those come out of place, you do
Yeah.
have to fix them again, and so that has a difference. It's different to when we just had tire barriers or concrete walls, or going way back, just hay
Yeah.
bales or nothing at all, basically. Um, but the thing is that it depends on how deformed it is, because with someone like him, that could have been done under a safety car. You could, if it just needs to be pushed back into place or something, it doesn't necessarily
Hmm.
need the entire race to be stopped. Because I mean, red flags, they end up being very disruptive when they're used when they shouldn't, because it delays things. There's often then endless delays because they have to have like a 10-minute warning of then we go onto the grid and do all of this. And I mean, we saw this in Monaco last year, was just ridiculous of how long the delays were for that. One thing
In
with
Singapore
Australia
as well.
specifically, though, is that I did
In
Singapore.
Singapore
Yeah,
as
that
well.
was
He had a delay. Yeah.
what was the red
It was for rain.
what was the red
It
flag
was
in
basically
Singapore? Because
delay at the
it
start of,
rained. Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. So there wasn't. I don't think there was a red flag in the race, but they delayed the start because of rain.
Hmm.
That sounds about right. Yeah. I mean, one thing I
Something like
noticed
this.
actually,
Yeah.
again with Australia
Hmm.
specifically, is that since last year they brought in those new catch fencing, which is like a sort of perspex um, glass
Yeah.
shield instead of just a fence. But also, a lot of the barriers were much closer to the track than the year before, particularly on the last corner, and then at turn 2, which is where Magnussen crashed, and then Ocon and
Yeah.
Gasly. And in the Formula 3 race, there was somebody that hit the wall at the last corner. And I just know, I mean, there were parts of the track, I think partly because of the new barriers and because of the new catch fencing, I was like, this doesn't look like Albert Park. It looks like a different circuit to me. And they
It
had moved
does.
some of the
Yeah.
barriers around and
There
brought them
has been
closer to
change.
the track.
Yeah. Even I don't understand why that is. I think the biggest example was the run down to turn three. It looks so different now. You just go back, you watch 2007, 2008, even 14, 15, and you compare it with the cameras that were placed. I first thought it was just a camera angle where probably I was getting a different view.
Hmm.
But then you look at it closely, it does appear that the barriers have been moved a bit closer to the track. I don't know why. Probably they thought it was a bit innocuous. You don't really expect a crash at that particular zone. Maybe that's why.
I mean, yeah, I suppose in the past, turn 3, well, turn 3 has had big crashes in the past. I mean, in
Alonso.
1996, Martin Brundle had his one, and then obviously 2016, Alonso and Gutierrez had that nice big shunt. But it did
Yeah.
look a lot narrow. I don't think it held. When I was watching the Formula 3 race at midnight, which is really weird, watching a race at midnight, it was in the morning, and
Oh.
I think because the sun was on the other side of the sky, that made it look different. Because when you watch the F1 race, it's late in the afternoon, and obviously the sun's going down, and so that was why I was like, this looks like a different circuit, and that. But yeah, they've just brought everything in, and I don't know if they've literally moved the walls, because I mean, when you see the circuit because it's a street circuit. When you see it when the race isn't on, it looks nothing like it does. All of the infrastructure, except for the paddock building, gets taken down, and it's just city streets going around a lake. But they just moved everything in a bit closer, and because they put the Tech
Yeah.
Pro in everywhere. That's why we were seeing what I think, to me, I don't think it comes across as basically a massive drop in driving standards because there were so many accidents in F1, F2, and F3. But I think it was just because there was less room for less
Yeah.
margin for error.
Yeah. I'll actually get back to that. My first concern, I mean, my first real question in all of this is, what do you attribute to the increase in red flags? Because look, I've been following since 2005 6. Red flags were a rarity at that point in time. We didn't really used to have. It was it was something that rarely happened. Because at that point in time, there wasn't this levity that exists now when it comes to broadcast. At that point, it was a bit like you have a 1.5 hour or maybe 100 to 110 minutes window in which you have to get done with the race. Now there seems to be a bit
Mm.
more of a freedom on that front. So maybe they are probably a bit more independent or have a bit more freedom to delay the races a bit. Maybe that has played a role. But I've seen quite a few races even in the past where crashes have been there, but red flags have become a bit more prominent since probably 2015, 2016, something like that. It didn't used to happen before that. We didn't really see that many red flags.
Mm. I think the main reason is safety, and obviously since Joe Bianchi's accident, race control have gone a lot more careful
Hmm.
particularly when it comes to rain. They're much more hesitant about letting the
Yeah.
drivers race if it's in heavy rain. Um, and a lot of the red flags that we've seen have been because of rain. But yeah, when I first started watching, they were
There
really rare.
was, yeah.
There was only 6 or 7 of them in the whole of the 2000s. And I think most of those
Yeah.
were due to rain.
And
I mean, there was one obviously that you get exceptions. I mean, when it comes to broadcasting, in the UK, it's no longer free to air. So you used to be able to watch it on ITV, and then after that, it was the BBC live. And then when Sky Sports got it,
yeah.
now Channel 4 has it, but they can only show highlights, except for Silverstone, which is live. But I remember Canada 2011, there was that 2 hour red flag in the middle. And the BBC, they showed the whole thing,
Oh yeah.
and obviously they weren't expecting to have this go on for
Mm.
4 hours. So they because they knew people wanted to watch, the halfway through you had to switch to a different channel, and then they just had to push back everything else that was going to be broadcast afterwards. I feel like they wouldn't
Yeah.
really do that these days. If they could, obviously with Sky it's
Yeah,
different
but
because
now
it's an
the
F1 channel, so they'll show it no matter what. But,
yeah.
that there is more leeway. The main
Plus the
one
thing is
is
the red
safety,
flag
but
rules have
something that
also
people
changed,
picked
no?
up on in the comments on Twitter. Sorry.
The red flags rules, they've also changed now. Earlier it only used to be a rolling start. Now we have a standing start, and that brings a bit more jeopardy, and that's something that has arguably, I think, it changed in 2017 or 18, something like that. It didn't used to happen before that. And since then we've had Monza 2020 when Gasly won. That was affected by red
Mm.
flag. Leclerc crashed. Then we had when Lewis went straight on at Baku 2021. That race was affected by red flag. And I think Imola 2020, it was also affected by red flag. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe that one was. The thing is,
Yeah,
it's a bit like there has been a correlation between improving the entertainment aspect and also keeping the safety intact. There's been that effort,
yeah. This
concerted
is
effort
something
from
in
F1.
on the on the tweet. This is something people picked up on, is that the game changer does seem to have been Monza 2020. Because I mean,
Hmm.
with Formula One in general, it needs to be a fine balance between basically safety, fairness, and entertainment.
Yeah.
Um, and with the red flags, you can kind of see when they're swinging towards an entertainment perspective,
Yeah.
because doing rolling starts, it does nothing for safety, it doesn't do very much for fairness, but it does everything for entertainment. Or a standing start, sorry, not a
Standing
rolling
start.
start.
Yeah.
Um, Yes, yeah, standing start. And obviously a roll, because a red flag. Uh, I mean, by its nature, it resets things in the same way a safety car does.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't really push it back to square one, and as if you're just starting the race all over again, because you will get people like Max who are leading the whole race. It's like, well, if I stall at the start of this, I'm going to drop back to last when I've been leading the whole race,
Yeah.
and then lose it all in the final 2 laps or something.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't. I get.
There's
The thing
just
is,
too
I get
much
so
of it.
confused about the rules because they keep changing the rules about when red flags, when you count the classification from, and if you do a standing start or a
It
rolling
was
start, and all of
maniacal.
this.
I almost
I
thought,
think it. Yeah,
yeah, honestly. I was almost
and this
wishing,
was.
at least if only Max had reached the first sector, at least Hulkenberg will have his first podium. That was the only thing I was hoping, because it was for me locked on that Sainz will have a penalty. That was, at least in my view,
Yeah,
it
I
was
mean,
a
I
slam
didn't
dunk
really take
penalty.
that in because the thing is, I had to watch. It was too early in the morning for me to watch it live, and then I was going to watch a live replay, but because the race had been delayed by an hour, I tuned in for that, and they were showing the results, which is very clever of
Okay.
Sky. So I watched the highlights, and I wasn't really taking in. Oh, Hulkenberg nearly finished third or whatever. I didn't even know there was that rule about you must get through the first sector before they take the classification. I'd
Yeah.
never given any of this any consideration. It was 2021 because every time a race got red flagged or safety card in 2021, you had Mercedes and Red Bull going to Michael Massey and trying basically bargaining to get a race order that benefits them.
Yeah.
And we saw that like Azerbaijan in particular, they were trying to get them to say, "Oh no, let's not restart the race. Can we just take the classification?" It's like you're saying that because otherwise Max loses the
Yeah.
win or whatever. And it's like, okay, the crash wasn't his fault, but loads of people have lost wins for things that weren't their fault, and that's just the way it
Yeah.
is. Um, and it's just, yeah, it is a tricky one. It depends on when they happen because we keep seeing red flags right at the end of races
Because the
now
thing is, what
when there's
happened
so little
in,
left in it.
yeah, the thing is, what happened here was in Australia. I mean, when I saw the race, when they brought out the red flag, the first one, I was pissed because honestly, I thought the race was over. Australia is not famous for overtakes. Everyone gets to change their tires. So what we were going to have was a
Mm,
it was going to be single file till the end of the race. That was what I expected.
yeah,
So we had quite a few interesting overtakes. Apparently, the fourth DRS zone helped, but at any point in time, the first impression that I got was that red flag in no way it aided the entertainment factor in any which way. Somehow that made me feel that okay, it was justified why the stewards went with that. The second one was where it absolutely pissed me off because somewhere down the line that was entirely based on helping the entertainment quotient. 2 laps behind safety bar, get it done, over. That's it. Why are you risking putting those drivers in a situation where cold tires, first of all, then the visibility issues? Perez talked about it that when the sun's setting,
mm,
the direction is directly into the eyes of everyone going to the turn one. So the breaking point can be misjudged. And apparently, after the first row, it was Verstappen, Alonso, and Lewis. These three people judged their breaking point perfectly. Gasly overshot, uh, Sainz overshot, Logan he clattered into debris. So everyone had an issue with the breaking point,
mm,
and that was something that Perez referred to. There was no point of risking it, and
yeah.
yeah, it
I
blew
mean,
up in their faces.
it's obviously just the way the circuit's designed because it points the start finish straight, it points in a northwesterly direction, so the sun is going to shine straight at you. And because they do it late in the afternoon, whereas they don't seem to have that
Yeah.
problem at Abu
Hmm.
Dhabi because the sun goes down, but they don't complain about being blinded by it. Yeah, it
The,
didn't help. I mean,
the
this is the thing.
buildings, no,
It did
the
re.
high rises, you really can't see the sun. Anyways, in Abu Dhabi, there are too many high
Yeah,
rises,
yeah. Of course,
so
it's surrounded by it's like being in a stadium, Abu
yeah.
Dhabi. It's
You
yeah, but
don't They don't complain of the wind as well at Abu Dhabi.
mm, yeah, it's yeah, with the red flag, it did reset things a bit because before that, when it was just a safety car, because what George had pitted but Lewis and Max hadn't. And so you thought, okay, well, that's mixed things up because they've decided to stay out from track
That
position,
would
but
have
then
been
they're going to go
fun.
long. And then the red flag happens. It's like, okay, everyone's changed their tires. It's like in
Yeah.
the games, if there's a safety car, every single driver pits. And so it's like, okay, so we've just,
Yeah.
everyone's now pitting at exactly the same time. And that's just how the game's going to go. That's not interesting at all. And
Yeah.
that's what a red flag does. Whereas a safety car, you'll always get a mix because not everyone can pit. But a red flag is
True.
it's a very
That's
touchy
what.
issue. Allowing people, first of all, to change tires in red flags, but also repair the car if it's damaged. Because again, 2021, if Lewis wasn't allowed to fix his car at Silverstone in the red
Visually.
flag, he would have
Yeah.
retired as well. And then Hungary, they basically like sticky taped bits of his barge boards back on the car, and it just about worked. But obviously, it finished seventh or eighth or something.
Yeah, I think he only beat a Haas or something
Yeah,
like that. He was 10th or ninth, probably. Yeah, that was
yeah,
forgetfulness.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
now moving, I think, yeah, more or less, in case of the red flags, I think we are somewhere on the same line. I mean, if I ask the final conclusion in your view when it comes to red flags, how would you like it to be approached at the end of the day?
I think
Because there needs to be a
clearer
balance,
rules
right?
around things
There's
such
been
as when
a
you should.
right. Uh, Ultimately, what it comes down to is there has been an increase for sure, but I can't really fault the first red flag in Australia. It's when they are being used blatantly to help to create jeopardy. I'm not in favor of that because it kills the sporting element. So I mean that's where I come from. Basically that's my entire crux of the whole thing. When it comes to red flags, it should not be about, okay, when it comes to safety, sure, use it, and even if you're using it a bit blatantly, fine, but not when there are only 2 laps left. Imagine if something like this had happened in Abu Dhabi 2021, if this was how they had gone about it, and if Max had won in this scenario, we'll still be shouting over the same thing. So somewhere we need to draw a line when it comes to that. Probably ending the races into safety car is many people might not like it. It's probably the best way to go about it right now.
I think they basically just need to lay out very clear cut definitions of what does and doesn't justify a red flag. Because a lot of the red flags we've seen, it's things where that only needs a safety car. To be honest, because it used to be basically if a driver had been seriously injured, if the rain was ridiculously heavy, or if there'd been a security breach and somebody had broken onto the circuit.
Yeah.
Or if, say, the track was completely impassable because it was being blocked by several cars. But a lot of the ones we see, it's like that can be done under a safety car. You don't need a red flag for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's why there's the main thing. There's just such a sharp. I don't think it has anything to do with like it's not as connected to fatalities as a lot of people on Twitter seem to think, because there are very few fatal accidents where it would have been prevented if they had put out a red flag, because the red flag would not have been justified because the accident needs to happen first. And there are obviously a lot of them they should
Probably.
have red flagged it after the accident happened, but there are some where it's like people say this with Bianchi. His accident, there was no justification for a red flag before he crashed because Satil was already off track and getting the crane, and you could do a safety car for that, but that doesn't need like a red flag or anything. Um,
He aquaplaned, no?
it's examples.
Jules
Sorry,
Bianchi, he aquaplaned at Spoon, right? I think it happened at Spoon, where he, where what happened was there was too much rain, and he aquaplaned straight into the recovery
he
vehicle.
caught. It was at the Dunlop curve. He
Okay.
caught a stream in aquaplane. I think basically they were waving. They were waving. This is before we had the virtual safety car as well. They were doing double waved yellows. But I think the other thing is that the telemetry showed he didn't appear to slow down, or at least he didn't slow
Hmm.
down enough.
Hmm.
But I mean, and the rain was getting heavier again, but it wasn't getting like red flag heavy. But I think because
Hmm.
there was a crane on track, they should have used a safety car for that, and instead they just used double
Yeah.
wave yellows. But yeah, there was no red flags are irrelevant in that case because there wasn't any need for a red flag before he had
They
his
have too
own
much of an
accident.
impact. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that's where we put a tab on the very first topic.
Mm.
The next one is
Yeah.
well, Stefano Domenicali, he came up to in his recent quote. I am still not. I have not really heard his interview. Only I've come across quotes, and I'm not entirely sure he actually means it. But looking at what he said in the past, he probably does. 25 races in a season, and maybe in future, not immediately, but maybe in future we might be looking at as many as 30 races in a season. What's your view on that?
Well, I remember the days when we only had 16 or 17
Yeah.
races, and that was more than enough. He seems to be on a quest now to just eliminate practice and cram in as many races and sprint races as possible. And I get that obviously any F1 fan wants to see more races, but then you need to remember that there are people putting this stuff on, and it's a lot of time and effort. I mean, not only the drivers, but the mechanics as well. They're on the road constantly, traveling all across the world, usually jumping back and forth between continents because the races are so jumbled up as well. And you can't expect them to be spending every weekend of the year doing this. Um, and I think, I mean, last year I tried to devise my own calendar, and it had, I think, a maximum of 21 races, which gives you time to have things like double headers, 3 week breaks, a summer break in August, and that, and designed so that it goes in more of a sort of east to west trajectory across a map, so that you're not flying back and forth all the time as well. But they're
Okay.
not being realistic
So
when he says throwing in like
you'll be
25,
starting
30 races.
from Japan or something like that.
Yeah, so what it was, let me think, I've got it here actually. I had, so what I did was it was start in Australia and then go to, then bring back Malaysia
Mm,
and then do Singapore after that. So we
mm,
got those in March and April. Then Japan, then Baku and Turkey, and then we go down south to Kyalami for South Africa, so we can have Africa on the calendar. And then you go back up and do the European leg,
mm,
for the remainder of the summer.
mm,
And then in
mhm.
September, and then the final four races is Canada, America, Mexico, and Brazil. Um, the one issue with this is Canada, because it means doing Canada in October, which is probably not particularly good from a weather
Snowing.
perspective. Yeah,
Yeah.
and if it's not snowing, it's going to be cold and wet, and the tires are not going to work, and everything.
R-
That's the only one
Yeah.
that's a problem. The
Turkey.
rest
It will
of
be
them, I
Turkey
think,
2021.
it would just be too. That's the Canada's the only one that I think is a tricky one in terms of where to place it. The others are all across the spring and the summer. Well, in the northern hemisphere at least. I suppose actually Kyalami. Well, yeah,
Mm.
Kyalami's in the winter, but I don't know if they have a winter that's particularly cold or whatever. Um,
They're not that
and I
bad.
think it means
No.
that Singapore and Malaysia, that's in monsoon season as well, which Malaysia always used to be, to be honest, and that
Yeah.
was why half
It
the
will be
races were
tough.
so good. Yeah, but it's a much more logical, particularly from a jet lag perspective. I mean, the thing is, they still between races. I imagine drivers go home and come back again, but in terms of like the trucks, the lorries, and all the big infrastructure, you're not
Yeah.
dragging that across oceans all the time. Um, and it saves mileage. Again, we're talking about sustainability and everything, not jumping from Baku to Canada and then back to Europe in 2 weeks that we're doing this year, or whatever it is, or Baku to Miami and then back to Imola. Um, it's that there are lots of things they could fix. Oh, I mean, the other thing as well, you may have noticed, is that there are no races in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Um, and that's
I was
because,
about to
well,
ask.
yeah, and again, that's partly the We Race as One thing. It's mostly I kind of push them, well, unless you count Turkey as the Middle East, I guess. I push them out because, well, we
Not
shouldn't be
really.
racing in Jeddah. We
Not
don't need
really.
to go
It's
to
not rich
Qatar
enough.
again. Abu Dhabi is on Yeah, Abu Dhabi is only good when it's a title decider. Bahrain is, to be fair, reasonably good, but I said Bahrain can be a testing venue. So I've got Bahrain and Catalonia as the two places for testing. Um,
Catalonia, it
but
used to
yeah, if they're
snow.
gonna if they if it,
During
yeah, Catalonia,
during the testing pre season testing. It used to be winters, and many a times we used to miss days. That's why they actually moved to Middle East when they started doing it in
Yeah, I mean, I remember a few years back. I think it was 2018. 2018. It snowed during preseason
yeah,
testing in Catalonia.
yeah,
I
good
mean, one
times.
thing, because the thing is that I put in the calendar, I put in Portugal, but not Spain.
Hmm.
I might be better off putting Catalonia in, partly because we got Sainz and Alonso, um,
Hmm.
and just to keep, and because it's been there for a long time. Because the thing is, it just doesn't produce that good a race anymore. Because I think the
Yeah.
problem is the drivers and the teams, they know the circuit too well because they test there all the time, and they know exactly what
Hmm.
setup they need. They know exactly when they're going to pit, what tires, and they just run it. And it just doesn't, even though it's such a good circuit, it's just not producing good races, which is a shame, really,
Barcelona.
because it has such a good atmosphere and
I
it's
mean, in my, I mean, the issue that I feel is it's pretty much single file. You really don't have too many places where you can try different lines. I mean, even last year we saw, no, when Max was battling George Russell, the only possible place where he could overtake was on the straights, and his DRS wasn't working. So more or less, he was stuck behind
yeah,
him, and maybe at the end of sector 1 there is one braking zone where you can probably take a different line, but then these cars are humongous, so it's been an
yeah.
issue.
It's not the widest of circuits, and a lot of the corners are not ones you can really follow through because there's a lot of like high speed turns and blind ones,
Yeah,
and obviously, thankfully, they've gotten rid of that stupid chicane at the end, which just killed the
yeah,
momentum. Of course, somebody is going to go
no,
off into the barriers in FP1, and then they'll bring it
100%,
back or something
100%.
because of that.
No, 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 no,
Yeah,
I don't think they will.
um,
They're too much into entertainment right now. They'll just let it be. I'm not I don't think
yeah,
Domenica is not going to let that
but
happen.
it's just it's a good circuit in the perspective. It looks like a classic circuit, and
It
it
is,
has a
yeah,
good mixture of high and low speed turns and elevation change. But the races just don't land,
yeah.
unfortunately.
It's had a few good ones, but it's rare. More or less, it's either when you have too much tired egg, maybe there's probably something happening. The thing is, at the end of the day, unless and until you have a good battle for the lead, the races are quite boring in Barcelona. That's what used to happen most of the times. I mean, even in,
Yeah, that
it wasn't fun. Yeah, not it's never been my, anyway.
mm,
Coming back to the calendar, so in your view,
yeah.
21 races are optimum, right? That's what you'd feel. Honestly, even I come down to the similar number. Even, look, my main concern has been, if you're going to increase these many races, if you're going to have 25 races, for instance, let's take this as a number. There are 52 weeks in a year, so you're already clocked up 25 of them. Then add 10 to 15, roughly these many weekends will be the ones in between, which will be spent in transit. So there are 40 weekends that are gone. You have only 3 months left, the 12-week period. In that, not
Mm,
only do the teams have to take a winter break, they have to develop another car, then they have to work within a cost cap, and then they might even have to start shuffling the team personnel because 25 races become too much. You're demanding far too much from the team side. And we're not even talking about a driver right now who might be in an intense championship battle. It's going a bit overboard when it comes to that.
yeah.
The first instance was when you follow MotoGP, the bike racing.
Hmm.
Yeah, so even in that case, they've introduced the sprint race format, and they are worse than Formula One, by the way. They've introduced it in every race. So every race will have a Saturday where there will be a sprint, and Sunday where there will be a race. And qualifying will be, you qualify once, the same grid will be used in both the races. So basically, it's free for all in the sprint, just like it will be in the new format right now. So what happens is, in sprint,
Yeah,
you get the best race of the weekend, and on Sunday it's a bit of a dud because on Saturday everyone is going hell for leather. There are lesser laps. They don't have to do any tire management or anything. It's the best race of the weekend. Plus, you can overtake a lot more in MotoGP. On Sunday, there's a lot of tire management and other things that need to be taken care of. So you get a bit of a dud of a race on Sunday. So that's the problem that they're facing right now. And when it comes to having now, unfortunately for them as well, there's only a single team that is leading. Ducati has an amazing bike, and they're probably running away with it. Similarly, right now we have in Formula One only a single team that is ahead. So if we have 25
Mm.
races, out of which Max wins 2021, then you can have as many sprints or whatever. Fans are going to turn off. There's no point of watching a singular guy win that many races. And that's where the problem lies for me. I want to see competition, not more
Yeah,
races.
I'd never actually. I mean, I like this new format that they're doing separate. That they're not counting the sprint result in the race result, because when they first did this and they had practice after the sprint race or after qualifying, but you couldn't change anything. It's like, well, there's no point doing this.
Yeah,
Um, and so I hadn't actually considered that it would make the Sunday race dull, because the thing is they are just going to save tires the whole time, and it's something that drives me nuts. Like when we had a couple of years ago when they were running like 10 seconds off the pace at circuits just to save tires. It's like, or you could just go
yeah,
at normal speed and do one extra pit stop, and maybe it'll be faster. It's the complete opposite of IndyCar, where they're running flat out non-stop. And I'm
yeah.
starting to get into IndyCar now because it's so high energy,
Hmm.
compared to F1 in that sense. But if they do the sprint races properly, because even in the sprint races they're still doing tire management. And it's like, well, that's not that. It's a sprint. You're not supposed to do that. Like, if you wanted, you
Yeah,
could make it a 5 lap race and make them do it on like super soft tires and say, no, no, you have to go fastest, or we're gonna fix your engine maps so they're cranked up to full. So you just have to go all out, because otherwise we're not gonna. Because otherwise, all they're doing is giving you a preview of the first stint of the race on Sunday.
yeah,
And again, it lets you reset the grid, because you end up with these crazy qualifyings, and then all the sprint race does is undo that so that it's a normal grid again on
yeah.
Sunday, just like
Fortunately,
in Brazil
they've
last
changed
year.
exactly, and they're changing that. No, the new format is going
Yeah.
through. But the thing is, whenever even if you have this kind of incentive to go hell for leather in a sprint, you really won't be doing that because the cost cap won't allow it. Alpine has already lost two cars completely. The two cars are totaled. They're gone after what happened
Mm.
at Australia. Will they be risking any kind of outrageous maneuver in a race? They probably won't, because there's no point of it. They'll lose the car, they'll lose even more when it comes to the cost cap and the entire thing. It's a bit of a it's a vicious circle where look, where I come down at it is, if at the end of the day we get a season like 2021 where we have two drivers at the top of the games and two teams that are performing pretty much as close to each other as possible, and then you add 25 races and then 10-15 sprints, it's only going to be a battle of attrition, because one of them is going to be mentally so exhausted that by the end of it, even the
Mm.
fans will be done, everyone will be done. It will be a bit like, okay, fine, the season's over now. It shouldn't be dragged that long. Just what I feel right now. 25 gets a bit too much.
Yeah, it just gets a bit it gets a bit much. Like it's when you get to the summer break and then you realize there are another 10 or 11 races left, and it's like barely 15 years ago there were like 4 races after the summer break. It's like it's just too much. It is a bit
Schumacher
too
won the
much.
championship by summer break. I think in
Yeah,
2002 he won the
but it's like, well,
championship
at
by
least
summer
okay,
break.
he's won it. At least there's only what four or five races left instead of 10 to go
Yeah.
through after he's won it.
Jesus. You follow
But
cricket?
yeah, this. I mean, the past. No, no.
I mean,
I've been to a game once, but I don't follow it. No.
yeah. So I mean, you're from England. I'm from India. So one thing that you might have seen even there, one of the biggest issues with cricket right now is the excess of it. There's too much of cricket right now, and what that has done is, it has. I mean, there's IPL. There's probably some league in England. There's one in Australia. So what that has done is, it has
Mm.
completely ended the stakes part of it. There are no stakes. Today the two teams are playing, they'll be playing again a week later. Then they'll be playing again a month later. So you don't really feel the importance of a race, of a match right now. And that's something that I hope Formula One doesn't do, because you lose the importance at the end of the day. There are too much of it.
yeah, and there's this thing of if you crash out of one race or have an engine failure, it's like, oh well, I've got 10 more races to make that up again.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter nearly as
It
much
doesn't
now
hurt.
when you have
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, when it comes to
But I think in the past 20 years, we've had this problem of just too much sustained dominance from one driver or one team. When before that, that didn't. It was so much more mixed. To be honest, and
yeah,
yeah,
I did this thing on. I mean, I also write for Sportskida. There's a sports website. So I basically analyzed why this was happening. So one of the reasons behind it was the fact that as the years have gone on, the first movers advantage has become a much bigger factor. It didn't used to be that big a factor earlier on because the rules were a bit more fluid. You had more room to grow or make developments. Now, since that has narrowed, what that has done is there's only one possible solution to a regulation, and the team that reaches it first or identifies it first, it always has that advantage which it carries on until those particular regulations are done. Mercedes did it, and I think Red Bull perfected the blown diffuser. Then Mercedes had their turbo engine. Now Red Bull has perfected the ground effect. So we are seeing this pattern emerge, that because the rules are becoming a bit more restrictive, the solution of the entire technical regulation is singular. The team that identifies it first, it tends to have that advantage over the other.
yeah. I mean, what's happened? It's inhibiting innovation. Because if you go back to the ground effect era 40 years ago, we had
Mm,
a period of what 5 or 6 consecutive seasons of 6 different champions in different teams because ground
yeah,
effect was not
yeah,
the. I mean, they hadn't even specified. Oh, the car must have 4 wheels at that time, and then you had, and so as well as ground effect, you had 6 wheeled cars, and you had the fan car, and everyone was thinking up all these novel new designs, and
yeah.
then people would start copying it, and then eventually it gets banned because this stuff always does. But that was what was mixing it up. Whereas these days, I mean, I was particularly the ground effect cars, they don't really, none of them look particularly unique. They all look, aside from Mercedes having, their no sidepod thing,
Look the
they all
same.
look more or less the same, and they've got the same like
Yeah,
anti-to nose
yeah.
as well. And there's not, and again, that's why I mean, the field has never been this close. I mean, there's less than 2 seconds between the whole field now. It's ridiculous, like considering it's not a spec series. I mean, the gaps in Formula Two are bigger, and they all drive the same car. Um,
Yeah.
it's never it's I mean even 10 years ago HRT and Virgin, they were still what 4 or 5 seconds off, and we've got down to less than half of that now. And then
Yeah.
go back 30 years, there was like 8, 9, 10 seconds between the fields, and if you were 2 seconds
Easy.
down, you qualified third or
Yeah.
fourth, not 20th. Yeah, it's just
Exactly.
yeah,
And
it's
you used to
taking away
gain much bigger time at that point. At that point in time, the in-season development was a lot more. You could gain a second or something easily during the season. Now it's a
it
bit like,
it will close up, whereas
yeah.
these days it's so subtle.
Now it's a
Yeah.
bit like half a second is maximum. You gain a half second, you're golden. That's like you've got the best that you could out of any particular upgrade package. I mean, even in 2012, remember when Ferrari
Yeah.
was struggling like anything in the first two races, and then they reached Barcelona with this entire new package and that in-season test, and I think Alonso was on the front row. That's the kind of thing that you don't
Mm.
see anymore. Just not possible.
Yeah, I mean, even 2012. Obviously, we're covering HRT later, but HRT went from being what
Hmm.
seven. Well, they missed 107% in the first race, but in Malaysia they were 7 seconds off, and then by the end of the season they'd got that down to about 3.5. So they'd halved their deficit, even though it still meant they were the slowest team.
Yeah.
Um, and in the 90s, people did that, but these days you just don't. It's just such small increments
It's
because
not possible.
the updates you can make are so tiny,
Yeah,
and the cars just all look the same and run
exactly.
the same
And that's what,
basically. They're not. I
and
don't
that's
like.
the
I
thing.
don't. From an aesthetic and technical perspective, I don't like these cars, the modern ones.
They're too, they're fat. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. They are too huge. They're too bulky, and you feel their size and the entire thing when they are in Monaco, because I mean we've been through the
Mm.
entire era and we've seen how the 2005 2006 cars used to be, and you see these cars, you can see a marked difference, and that's here to stay, I
Yeah,
guess. But it's
it,
They don't
it,
look good.
it was amazing seeing one of the historic Grand Prix that they do, and there was some cars from the 60s, and it was showing them going around the Lowe's hairpin. I was like, they're so small. And you can see how that would have been good because you could drive the car hard and fast and you could drift around the corners of room to spare. But with these ones, like getting around that hairpin, they have to take their left handle off, go all the way around, like in first gear or whatever,
Yeah,
and they're still struggling to get around it. The cars they are
exactly.
just too big, and it's not even. I mean,
It's
they
crazy.
got bigger in 2010 when they got longer because they had the bigger fuel tanks. But since then, they've just scaled up in every other way,
Hmm.
and it's making them, even though
It's the
they've
V6
never been
turbos as well.
faster.
They've
Well,
really taken these cars much.
yeah. I mean, the cars that we obviously in the 80s, the engines are more powerful, but they were much smaller and lighter. And the cars, the power to weight ratio in the 80s was about double what it is now.
Exactly.
But the cars are slower because the
Yeah.
aerodynamics are much worse and the tires and everything else. But yeah, there's a thing. Even though the car, I mean, technically, the 2020 cars are the fastest Formula One cars in history, but the cars have never looked slower. Like when you compare, like mid 2000s Schumacher Alonso's cars, they're darting around the corners, but they're actually doing it slower, and they
Yeah.
sound faster as well because they got the proper engines. Like we need that back. It's like if you want to keep
Exactly.
hybrids, fine, but do it in a way that lets them rev up back up to 20,000 revs and stuff, not getting stuck on what 10,000 or whatever it is.
It's just the thing is that when it comes to Formula One right now, it's all about, first of all, it's about relevance. The road car relevance is there. Secondly, what it comes down to is they have to show that whatever they're doing, it can be replicated to the real world. And somewhere that's why I think Karan Chandok has spoken about it a lot, that he would prefer the V10s returning and running with the new sustainable fuel, something that Vettel did last season in British GP. When he tried the
Hmm.
Williams, Mansell's Williams, there has been a discussion on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But the thing is, when why he was shut down. I mean, what he speaks about, it comes down to the road relevance. The V6 turbos and the electrics are the future. That's where the entire world is leaning towards. Is it the future 10 to 20 years down the line? Who
Hmm.
knows? But for now, that is what they're trying to do. And that is where Formula One is. We are not going to be Formula E entirely, but we are going to move towards making it more sustainable and making it more attractive for the new automobile giants. Like the only reason why Honda is interested is because of the 50% electric ratio that we will have from 2026. Otherwise, they would not have been
Hmm.
interested. That is where the whole thing comes down to. Rules and regulations, they are being dictated by these things as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's there's always been that connection. A lot of technologies and innovations developed in Formula One will translate into road cars, and it's always been that
Yeah.
way. Um, it's
Okay.
if they
Talking
could just
about
find a way
regulation,
of having
rules and
hybrid.
regulations, by the way. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Go
Mhm.
ahead. I thought you were done.
I was going to say if they could find a way of making hybrid engines that sound like V10s, then that would be fine. Basically, I think that's my yeah. I just want that
Oh
scream
yeah.
back.
Just do you
Hmm.
remember the 2014 engines? How poor they used to sound. I mean, we've come a long way since then. The 2014 when
They have improved them. Yeah.
yeah, the 2014
Yeah.
engines they sounded like a hairdryer, and they used to piss me off like anything because I mean, I just graduated, so I got this new laptop and I installed 20. First, I was playing 2013 on my laptop. Then I started playing
Hmm.
2014, and it was horrible sound. And all first of all three engines sounded different. The Renault, Honda, the Renault, McLaren, and Ferrari at that time, and
Hmm.
they all sounded rubbish. There was no
Yeah.
Mercedes sounded the best, but it wasn't much of a respite. Like, and if you think about it, from that till now, we've made progress on that front. At least they sound decent enough now. They sound like racing
Yeah.
engines
It has
now.
improved. I mean, they have this quite distinctive. There's this kind of whine to it, the sound, which is quite
Yeah,
iconic. It's not very loud, and it just doesn't have the same. I mean, the thing is that that kind of screaming F1 sound that only developed in the '90s, so that's itself has not always been there. But these ones,
yeah.
they're lacking the scream, but they also don't have the like grunt that the cars in the
Oh, true,
'70s and '80s
true.
had. I mean, I went to Silverstone 2011, 2012. and they would do classic races as well in the afternoon using cars from the 70s and 80s, and they were louder than the current cars, which were the V8s at the time. And that just doesn't. It's just not the same now.
Yeah.
That's half of the spectacle of being there is the noise, I think.
Oh yeah, true.
Mm.
I mean, that is what will catch the attention. Earlier, in the earlier days, that was what used to catch the attention. Now that's not really there. But now there are other things that usually help. Anyways, talking about regulations, that will be the third topic that I wanted to talk to you about. What's your view? We've seen. I mean, we're in the second year of the regulations. They were supposed to bring the grid closer. We were supposed to have a closer championship, something that we had in 2021. We haven't really
Hmm.
checked all the boxes, but when it comes to the regulations, where do you stand on it? What's your view? Is it the right direction that we are going in, or we need to do something else?
I think generally it's working from the perspective that the cars can follow each other. And there are teething problems you'll have because obviously now some drivers adjusted better to ground effect than others. I mean, we saw like one really notable example was Latifi, who was kind of there or thereabouts in 2021 and then starts crashing constantly last year. It's so it from the problem is that it's because Red Bull have cracked it so quickly. Um, because, again, last year, like Ferrari could have been closer, but it was the strategies were creating problems when they were fast enough to keep up with them, and then by the second half, like Red Bull had just run away with it, and they couldn't keep up even when they were driving well.
Yeah,
But otherwise, it hasn't mixed the grid up that much, other than Mercedes
dropping back.
going down a notch. And then Haas went up, but then this year Aston Martin have gone up, but there's been hardly any changes anywhere else
Challenge at the
from
front.
the other teams. Yeah, it just hasn't. It's not like. I mean, 2009 is an extreme example because it completely turned the grid on its head. If we'd come into 2022 and Red Bull and Mercedes were both at the back, and suddenly Williams are looking like they're going to win the championship, it's a battle between Latifi and Albon or something, that would have been quite a
Wouldn't that be fun?
novelty. But it hasn't changed a huge amount, to be honest. And again, 2014.
Yeah,
Obviously Mercedes went up, Red Bull went down, Williams went up, but otherwise,
so
like
did
teams
Williams.
like, Cater and Marussia, they were still at the back. Toro Rosso was still at the back. And I
Yeah,
think that's just a money thing, to be honest, is that if you've got the money, it's not going to affect you too much. And if you don't have the money, you're just not going to find the loopholes that you need, that are going to give you an edge, really.
yeah,
I mean, Aston Martin is very interesting. A lot of people are saying it's Vettel's development, which I think which would not surprise me if he put a lot of insight into help into this next car in the same way that Schumacher is supposed to have done with Mercedes before Lewis Hamilton took over, but also having Alonso, because Alonso is just driving the socks off the car. And you can see that he's obviously not fighting Red Bull. I think it is a slower car than Mercedes, but he is able to just keep on their toes by just giving it 110% every time.
you think so?
But
That's
it's
an
very
interesting observation.
it's very close between. I mean, Alonso is an interesting driver, to be honest, because he's obviously just supremely talented. I mean, to be driving as well as he is at his age, I haven't seen a driver driving that well in ever, really. I mean, we don't get many drivers in their 40s. I mean, the other ones that were recently were, Raikkonen and Schumacher and that. But he's punching well above his weight, considering the
You might
car
have to
he's
go
in and
back to
his
Mansell
age.
at the end of the day. I think Nigel Mansell was the last.
Yeah.
I think it was 40.
He was 40. He was 44 or 45 when he retired. He won his title at 42, 41 or 42.
That.
But the average age, the average age was higher back then, because as it's gone on, maybe because the cars are getting more physical, the drivers are just getting younger and younger. Um, but Alonso is still like he's got so much energy and so much confidence, and he just seems to know exactly what he's doing. Like he just pulls off these really clever strategies and tactics and everything, um, which most of the time would have worked better if he was in better cars, like spending years in
Hmm.
McLaren and Alpine and stuff. Um, he's just that's been his biggest weakness compared to people like Vettel, Verstappen, and Hamilton, is that he's nowhere near as congenial, and he not so good on the business side in terms of making the right team moves to different teams, and he's wasted so many years driving in subpar cars, really, or joining teams at the wrong time. Whereas Vettel and Hamilton and that have always, they were consistently driving in top tier teams, and forming
Yeah,
really good groups around them, instead of screaming GP2 engine at the team when things
that's.
aren't working or whatever.
I mean, yeah, that's what I, the last time when in my last podcast, I this was one of my key takeaways, that if Fernando Alonso had better interpersonal skills, he would probably be as successful as Lewis Hamilton.
Hmm.
I mean,
I mean,
even
you can
right
make a
now, you
case
can
for
see
him winning like
him
4 championships, probably.
easily. 2007, he would, even if he had kept a bit of, if he was slightly more smarter in the way he could have handled the situation at McLaren in 2007, he might have
Hmm.
even won the title, because he lost it by, what, I think, 1 point, and that was easily possible.
Yeah, I mean, he lost by 1 point. I mean, obviously he crashed out. I'm covering this in the iceberg. He crashed out in Japan, and I think he got in his own head because he wasn't expecting Lewis to be so close to him on pace. But yeah, really, he should have won it that year. Um, Obviously, I think the right driver won it in 2010 and 2012. I mean, in 2010, Vettel lost so many points from breakdowns and stuff like that.
Yeah,
2012, I mean, things did work it more in Vettel's favor, because Alonso got wiped out in Spa, and then also in Japan as well.
Japan. Yeah,
So those two were very marginal. But then he moves to McLaren just at the wrong time. If he'd stayed at Ferrari, I mean, he wouldn't have won that. He wouldn't have won championships in 2015, 2016, maybe 2017, 2018. Um, I mean, the big problem in 2017 was the car's breakdowns at the end of the season. 2018, Vettel was spinning a lot on that, and so that took away most of the points. But there's a case to be made for him winning, 4 or 5 championships, if he just made better decisions about what teams he was going to drive for, I
yeah,
think.
and stop shitting on your previous teams. I mean, he still takes digs at
Yeah.
McLaren, and even he now takes digs at Otmar, because I think he passed a comment that Adrian Newey is too old. He's 65. Otmar doesn't hire old people, something like that. Why are you doing something like this? And that is something that has stuck with Alonso pretty much throughout his career. He's been that guy that is.
Mm.
It's a bit like Alonso's team or nothing. That has always been the case, and it doesn't really work. More often than not, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, he's
Now
never
coming
he's
back,
never been a team player.
yeah, exactly. And by the way, coming back to this, the regulations. I mean, one thing what I've felt is,
Mm,
the things that were promised beforehand and what they've delivered. There is some sort of resonance to that, but there is one gaping hole that I don't think they would have expected. Maybe, maybe by the end of the season, I might change my mind. But for now, it does appear that maybe the regulations have failed. The reason why I'm saying that is because when it comes to the
mm,
entirety of, you know if there is any Formula 1 fan that started watching the sport in 2021, and he saw a spectacular season where you had two of the best drivers on the grid in the best cars, they fought till the last race. Whatever happened in Abu Dhabi happened. But at that point in time, you had two pretty much the top of the pile drivers, the best drivers fighting for the championship. And then you had Lando Norris winning a race. You had some jeopardy with Ocon winning a race, Alonso scoring a podium. I think Ricciardo also won a race. So that was the perfect season.
mm.
Since then, you've seen a single team
Yeah.
dominate, And then you've seen the cars change. And then you've seen arguably a 7-time world champion driving a car that he's pretty vocal about that he's not happy with it. For any fan that joined the sport in 2021, especially with the kind of promises that were made in 2022, that they will be closer, it will be easier to race. Now that has happened, but there was also this promise that
Mm.
look how great a championship we had in 2021. You'll have more of it in 2022, and there will be more contenders. Now, when you talk about contenders, there's contenders from P2, P3, P4. Earlier, it used to be only P2, P3 with either Ferrari and Red Bull or Mercedes and Ferrari. Now you have Aston Martin also joining the fray. But Red Bull has checked out. Red Bull is almost 1 second quicker than any other team. And when you have that kind of thing, you're looking at a 24 race season, and if Verstappen ends up winning like 15, 16 races, breaks his own record that he did
Mm.
last season, I won't be surprised. Fans won't be happy, and
Yeah.
even I feel a bit
I,
disappointed.
the thing is, the field has closed up, but Red Bull haven't. So everyone else has closed up, but Red Bull has got further away or stayed where they were. So the gap is still smaller, but
Yeah,
because the gap from Red Bull to the next team is so much bigger than from every team after that. Is what's because we went from 2017
yeah,
onwards. We got back into having Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes running at the front, and then you had Formula 1.5 behind, and then Ferrari dropped off, and then Mercedes have
yeah,
dropped off, and now Ferrari have dropped off again, and so now it's just Red Bull. Um, it's a thing. It is something. The field is
yeah,
close, but it's not close at the front. So the midfield is mixed, but we're not. There's no evidence that we'll have races in like 2012 and other years where you suddenly get, for example, Haas winning a race out of nowhere, or Alpine lock out the front row in
yeah,
qualifying. There's no evidence that that's going to happen at all, unless there's some major crashes at the
yeah.
front. Like there used to be races where you would have just the odd weekend where, for some reason, a midfield team suddenly has a car that works, and that just doesn't seem to be the case
Yeah,
anymore, despite the times being so close between teams.
the thing is, what has happened is everything has become so optimized. Earlier, what used to happen was if there are 10 areas, teams will focus on 3 or 4, optimize it to the utmost, and that would be enough for them to win races and championships. Now every box is ticked.
Mm.
Now you look at Red Bull, there is hardly any place where you can say that the team has a weakness. Driver lineup works. Operationally, the team hardly makes a mistake. And I think that is where the key difference is between Red Bull and Mercedes, that Red Bull is strategically, it's perfect almost. They rarely make a mistake. Then you look at the pit stops, they are still at the top. The car works like a charm. And even the the intra team harmony between the drivers, nothing is going to happen. Perez will mind his own business. He's not going to be too much of a thorn in Verstappen's side. So when you look at these things, if there aren't any weaknesses, what can any other team exploit? Earlier, there used to be areas like Ferrari is
Yeah, because
traditionally.
the thing is, they can eat.
Yeah. So
I mean, all I can say is all they can do is perfect their own car, and then it ends up being as fast as the Red Bull,
too
but not
perfect.
faster because they've both hit that ceiling. There's no
Yeah.
leeway to suddenly come up with some brand new concept that nobody's ever thought of before.
You don't even
Because
have
if
the
they do,
money
it'll
to
just get
make
banned
that happen as well.
immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's the thing, like in the 80s and 70s when they had basically infinite money and they were coming up with these innovations, is the field wasn't close, but it would mix up because people would come up with different ideas at different times.
Yeah.
um but
I mean,
it still
that's the
meant there
thing.
was that innovation.
I mean, if I ask you, when if you are going to compare, would you prefer a 2012 kind of a season or a 2021 kind of a season? Because both seasons were fun, but both were a bit different. They were interesting in different ways. One was unpredictable, one was hardcore, intense competition. So, what would you prefer as a viewer?
Yeah, I mean, I preferred 2012, to be honest, because it wasn't so high drama, but it was more mixed up because we had. I mean, there were mixed results in 2021, but every single weekend it was Max and Lewis that were faster than everyone else. But then in
Yeah.
2012, you've got obviously Red Bull and I mean McLaren were the fastest overall over the season, but they had so many breakdowns. But then
Hmm.
you had races like Barcelona, where Maldonado suddenly gets on the front row, wins the race, and then you had Sauber qualifying on the front row in some races,
Hmm.
and things like that. And so that didn't happen last year. Like it was always Lewis and Max at the front, no matter what,
Yeah.
and everyone else mixing up behind them. And you had and yeah, because what 7 different winners in the first 7 races or something like that
Yeah.
could never happen now. It just wouldn't happen. Um,
No.
and I don't know what it
I
was in
mean,
20. The thing is, the field was close in 2012. I mean, it was close. Everyone except Lotus, Caterham, and HRT were within about 2 seconds of each other. Sometimes only 1 second in qualifying, and then you had four,
that
five
was one of the
seconds on the end
reasons
of that
why
for the back
Alonso
three.
was as good as he was. That was the only reason why Alonso was able to do what he did that season, because the forms fluctuated a lot. But Alonso was the guy. He was finishing P5, P5, P5. That used to be the patented Ferrari number. While everyone else
Yeah,
was,
it was being consistent.
yeah, while everyone else was either winning or it was
It,
completely in shambles the other weekend. And that used to be how it used to the almost the entire first half until Vettel and Newey finally figured it out by what was it? I think it was Japan when they finally figured it out and started winning. And he went on a complete 3-4 race win
yeah,
streak and completely got the lead and started pulling out. Until then, it was a bit like who is going to be more consistent. And Alonso was
mm,
Alonso and I think Raikkonen as well to an extent. These two veteran drivers they shined through in those circumstances. Yeah, I mean
yeah. I mean, Raikkonen was the only driver that scored points in every race in 2012. I mean, he was never a title contender, but he was consistent in
he
that perspective
classified
because he
he
didn't have any.
classified in every race. I don't think he scored point in every race.
I think he
Um,
finished. I'm sure that he.
China,
Oh no! China. I remember that China. He lost 10 places in one lap because
yeah,
his tires suddenly
went
fell off the cliff. Yeah, he
in
no no
one or
he
two
finished
laps if
every.
you
He
were
was
back.
the only
Yeah,
driver that finished every race. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the thing. The other problem with consistency is because the cars don't break down that often anymore. Reliability has never been so good. I think the average, because I've got a table charting this, the average finishing rate is about 85 to 90% for the past few seasons, whereas in the mid 80s it was 40% because the turbos are just
exactly,
blowing themselves to bits.
exactly.
And if you go back much further, like 1982, no driver won more than 2 races, and Rosberg wins it
Yeah,
because he was the most consistent. I mean, Didier Pironi, he nearly won the championship watching it on
yeah.
TV because he'd gone and broken his leg or whatever it was and
Well,
missed the last
he
4 races, but that was
yeah.
still enough for him to almost win the title.
Yeah, it was crazy. I think Prost lost it by a point or
Mm.
something like this. Prost lost it by a point. There were 3 or 4 contenders from different teams. There was Renault, there was Ferrari, there was Williams.
Yeah, Prost nearly got it. I think John Watson was in there. Someone Rene Arnoux. I can't remember who
I
exactly,
don't know
but
if
there
it
were
was a
several
Latios or
drivers who were.
Nelson Piquet. Nelson Piquet.
Yeah,
Nelson
PK
Piquet was
would have
also
been as
there.
well because he was the.
Brabham.
Yeah, I mean, again, it
I
happened
think
in
it
'83 as
was
well.
this
There
very
was like
season, no,
only
where he
2 or 3 points in it
punched
at the
that
end.
guy. I don't remember who he punched. He punched someone.
Um,
What's
Eliseo
his name?
Salazar, I think the guy from Chile. I think that's what it was. But yeah, the '80s was just so. I mean, people. I mean, Chandok has said people look at it with rose tinted glasses, and it's like you would have 2 drivers on the lead lap and everyone else's laps or breaking down, but it was still very just mixed
Yeah,
up. Like
exactly.
there wasn't so much sustained dominance. It did move back around because there was so much room for innovation with them developing ground effect and developing the turbo engines, and then you had like sequential
Exactly.
gearboxes that came in as well and active suspension, of course, traction control, that kind of thing. That was what made it so mixed up.
The thing is, will that kind of
And again,
formula
cars breaking down.
will it sell? I mean, will that kind of a formula sell right now as a product, as a Formula One product? That you have two teams that are almost a second or something, second a lap quicker. They're on the lead lap, and everyone else is not even on the same lap. Do you think something like that will sell as a product
I
in the
mean,
current age.
no, especially not if the cars never break down. So they're going
Exactly.
to finish every race in first or second. That was the one. I
Exactly.
mean,
It
in
would be
seasons
worse
like
than what we have right
1988,
now.
that yeah, not
Yeah.
1988 was obviously an exception because they were so far ahead and they won all but one race. But their cars still did break down a few times, even if it meant the other driver could then win
Yeah.
it when they didn't.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
It
now, I mean,
was, I
Red Bull have
think,
had Max has
McLaren
been
won
complaining over the
all
radio.
but one race.
Yeah, because when Senna got hit by a back marker in Italy, and
Yeah,
otherwise they would
and
have won
Berger
every
won
single
the
race, and they got pole
he
position
won
at
in
every.
Monza. Yeah.
Yeah, Gerhard Berger won in Monza, but then they got pole position at every single race except Silverstone as well, and that's because they were trialing new bodywork, which
Yeah.
just didn't work, and then they used it later in the year. But then in that race, Ferrari got pole, they got a
Yeah.
front row lockout, and then they finished like 13th and 17th or something because of that's something that they were inhaling
Yeah.
fuel, so they had to just cruise it all the time. Um,
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah, there is yeah, it wouldn't work now. People would complain it's the same because the cars are so reliable. Once someone's got the lead, you can. It's like, okay, I don't need to watch the race now because you know they're going to finish. Though I mean, they're like Lewis in this
Yeah.
respect. He's had across. I think he's had fewer than 25 retirements across his entire Formula One career. Most of and a fairly even mix of um, breakdowns and accidents and stuff. But as a Mercedes driver, I think his car has broken down in a race only 6 times in nearly 10 years, which is just insane. When Max used to have 6 breakdowns in a season.
Yeah. I
And
remember that
it's, yeah,
season, the last one with Renault that they had. Almost every race, I think Max would face something and he would be shouting expletives about Renault, about this engine. I think almost on an
mm,
every weekend basis. Ricciardo also had the same treatment.
2017,
I think 2017.
2017, 20,
Yeah.
yeah, 2017, 2018. 2018 was when it mostly hit Max in 2017, but then 2018 it was hitting Ricardo. I think retired six
Ricciardo a
times
lot
with engine
in
failures.
a row.
A lot of the
Exactly.
times a couple of times from the lead as well. And
Yeah.
that whereas Mercedes had Mercedes. I mean Hamilton. I think there was that one double retirement in Austria for
Austria
Mercedes in 2017.
2018.
Austria
2018.
2018, Mercedes had a double
Yeah.
breakdown. 2017, Hamilton had no mechanical breakdowns, whereas Vettel had two or three.
Yeah.
And that it's yes, it just depends. It's yeah, it just comes and goes. It
I mean,
depends on
that's
the
the
engine
thing.
and who's supplying it. And
Exactly. And that is where I think the current regulations, there is hope. If this whole development restriction thing, if it helps, we might see a scenario where Red Bull is arguably it gets caught up a bit to an extent. I don't expect any team to overhaul the kind of advantage Red Bull has in the season because
mm,
1 second per lap is a bit too much in the current day and age. You can't expect that much of a jump. What I expect is
no,
probably the gap would decrease. We might see teams catching up and maybe Red Bull shifting focus to the next season. That's what I expect what's going to happen this season. But the thing is, if that kind of situation happens and we have 24 races, and then we are moving to the next season where many will expect, and the next season there won't be any restriction there won't be this cost cap penalty, which will further reduce the Red Bull advantage. That's where people will start worrying whether the regulations are even whether they've done their job or not, because every almost I think Mercedes and Ferrari, they are both moving their car concepts towards Red Bull. So they will be basically playing catch up. You don't expect any team to play
mm,
catch up and ultimately overhaul the team that has already perfected the concept. I don't know. When you look at these things, it's a bit worrying that maybe the regulations, they might not provide the kind of, well, what they had promised basically. So I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical where we are with the regulations. The racing is going to get better, that is for sure. But how restrictive are these regulations that maybe a team cannot, maybe a team like Red Bull that is already starting to reach the utmost potential of its package. If that kind of scenario is there, unless that is there, we are not really, looking at a scenario where you see competition, where you see anyone challenging Max. In all honesty, I don't really see it.
Yeah, I think we can probably make a better assessment at the end of this season because things may change, but at the moment it's looking like basically, barring accidents or breakdowns, Red Bull are going to win every race, and maybe after
Hmm.
they've secured the titles, the Ferrari or Mercedes will get one just because they're not going to push as hard or something. But
Yeah,
it maybe only very subtle changes might mix it up because again, from 2009 to 2013. Obviously, 2009 was a bit of an outlier, but 2010, obviously, very close 2010. Vettel dominates 2011, very close 2012. Vettel dominates
decisively.
2013. So they managed to mix it up in that and everything. And a lot of that was to do with
There
the
was there
diffusers.
was there
Um,
was some regulation change from 2011 to 2012. I don't remember what it was. There was something that changed. Also, we had that stepped nose, right?
uh,
So something had
yeah,
changed.
in 2012, they banned off throttle exhaust blown diffusers and they brought in the step nose. And that was the main thing.
I don't
Obviously,
remember, but
2011
it's
KERS
a
and
bit.
DRS
I think there
comes
was
in and Pirelli
something.
tires. Um,
There was something. There was something around the. I think it had to do with the exhaust diffuser that they had, the blown diffusers that Renault was
Whether
able
they
to,
moved, they
the
because they
way
got
they
rid
were
of the off
channeling
throttle
the
exhaust blown
exhaust
diffusers,
gases.
they moved the exhaust.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, they had that in 2011. It got banned for Silverstone and then brought back one race later, and then they got rid of it completely in 2012. But then you had
Yeah,
like Lotus had. I don't know. It was 2011. Lotus had this like forward facing exhaust, and then in
Coanda effect.
2012,
Yeah,
yeah, they had it, and then 2012 there was like a Coanda effect thing with that they had and Red Bull where they made like slots in the car's floor or something. Something I'm not an engineer, but something like that. But yeah, 2012 to 2013, basically nothing changed except the tires getting much worse. But that still stopped it being interesting,
yeah,
and that was enough to make it boring. Yeah.
exactly. Let's see.
Mm.
I mean, I think by the end of the season, we'll probably know where we stand with the regulations. I mean, I'm slightly skeptical after the first three races. Before the start of the season, I was more hopeful. My prediction was that we might see a three-way battle between Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull at the front, because I expected the regulations to be a
Mm.
bit restrictive. Because Ferrari, as usual, like every season since 2005 or 6, they've spoken highly of how much time they've gained over the winter and all those things. So I bought onto the hype once
Mm.
again. Every time in the last 16 years I have. um but yeah, on the Ferrari is where it is. Mercedes is a bit of a disappointment. I expected more, but yeah, I didn't expect Red Bull to be this dominant. They uh,
Mm.
it is what it is, I guess. This is the kind of season that we
Yeah, I mean,
have.
for the sake of my mental health, I refuse to be a Ferrari fan. I think they are just there are so many problems internally. I think that they need to fix before they start fixing the car. But last
Yeah,
year, the
I've given
midpoint
up.
around Austria last year, I was thinking, okay, now it's closing. Mercedes are catching up. It's like we're going to have a really close three-way battle here. Then Red Bull broke ahead. So Ferrari and Mercedes were close, but Red Bull was miles ahead, and so it became a one-way battle. Um, and
Yeah,
now, I mean, it puzzled me a bit that Mercedes they came out with this. They still did the no side pods thing, even though they know it doesn't work,
yeah,
and they were still doing that
it
this year.
was.
And I was like,
you
what? Yeah.
you think that was arrogance on their side, that we've been successful for the last 8 years producing the best car, we're not messing up this time around?
I think maybe yeah they're probably for. I mean they haven't been around that long compared to other. I mean neither have Red Bull to be honest. Obviously Ferrari and
Hmm.
that have been around for forever. Um,
Forever.
so they and it's been a very long time since they didn't have a dominant car. So maybe they were thinking that, or maybe they were just insistent. Oh, we've got it right, and
Yeah,
and that's how it's going to go. I think another thing to be honest is the fact that aerodynamics is not their strong suit. It's engines, and Mercedes last year had a particularly weak engine compared to Ferrari and
yeah,
Red Bull.
yeah,
And not only less powerful, but also more breakdowns, although the breakdowns rarely, if ever, affected Mercedes themselves.
It was more for the
Um,
customer teams, yeah.
yeah, they were having loads of problems, whereas before it was Honda and Ferrari and that.
Hmm.
But yeah, it just puzzles. I mean, because I think they've now conceded we basically just need to copy Red Bull if we're going to get catch up to them. And
Yeah.
maybe that's yeah,
I mean, yeah,
maybe that's
that's
what we'll see at the
arguably not
next
a good
year.
sign, but
Um,
I mean, yeah, that's again, that's an interesting. I mean, it would be worth seeing.
yeah.
I think next season is going to dictate whether Mercedes is going to the through the same decline that Ferrari went into 2009 2010, where Michael is gone, Todd is
Well,
gone. I don't know. I mean, it might happen or not, but by next season we'll know. There should be some
I
indication
think
where
it's different.
Mercedes
It's a bit
stands.
different to that because obviously when yeah, we'll see. I mean, maybe things will maybe when Lewis leaves, if they do suddenly drop off, it's like okay, maybe that's what was
Hmm.
carrying them and everything. But yeah, they're the kind of team they have such a high budget and such good stuff. They're never going to be any lower than like third fastest, to be honest.
Yeah, but that
They're
is
not going
also
to
the case
suddenly
with
come out with
Ferrari.
the
No,
slowest
Ferrari is
car next year.
also the same. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I mean they get their like legacy fee every year, don't they? They get extra bonus money because they've been around for so long and because of they're so critical to Formula One and its image.
yeah.
That they can't
No,
really
even if that
that they
is
haven't been
the case.
they haven't been genuine backmarkers for about 40 years now, Ferrari.
Oh yeah, but they've been
But they've
genuine
had obviously
underperformers.
they come and go. Yeah, I mean they've had they're obviously there were several years in the 80s and 90s when they were just messing around in the midfield doing nothing.
I
But it
think
hasn't been since
I
literally
actually checked
1980
checked the
when they
stat
were like
exactly. Since 19 if you since 1980 I think who was it? Who was the Jody Scheckter was the last Ferrari champion before Michael?
79, and then in 1980 he scored like 2 points and failed to qualify for a
Yeah,
race and
exactly.
finished 10th. Ferrari went from winning the constructors championship to finishing
To
10th.
last. Yeah.
But then after that, they were always either upper
And then
midfield
Gilles
or front
Villeneuve
runners.
was the new
I mean, the
hero.
first half of the
Exactly.
90s, yeah. But obviously, first half of the 90s was pretty grim when it was like Gerhard Berger and Sean Lacey and they were just breaking down endlessly and that. But then Schumacher comes in, and since then, they've been, aside from the first half of 2009, and I guess you could argue 2014, they've been consistently high
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
consistently
but that
competitive,
is
just not quite competitive enough a lot of the time.
but the thing is that is what you'll expect from a team like Ferrari, which is there was this feature by Mark Priestley, former McLaren engineer, who said that a team like
Mm,
Ferrari should be winning every championship because when it comes to resources, they have everything. When it comes to talent, they have everything. When it comes to passion, there is no team that comes close. But still, they
mm.
don't. And then he specifically pointed out that in the since Jody Scheckter until Michael Schumacher came, Ferrari challenged for titles I think twice or thrice. Once with Prost, maybe I think with Alboreto they also did that. Um
He was runner up in 85 at Michele Alboreto.
yeah,
Obviously, Prost in
so
91
there was
with
spurts
them,
of
1990 or 91. Mm.
yeah. So what?
But it wasn't until Schumacher came in that it brought it back up again and revamped the team.
Yeah, and that is what he specifically talks about that during the 10-year period where Schumacher was part of the team from 96 to 2006. That was the only time in Ferrari acted like a front runner in the sense that they didn't used to make the typical Ferrari mistakes that
Yeah.
they make right now or they made before that. And the thing is, what he specifically talked about was the DNA of the team changed when Schumacher came in. He brought in Braun, he brought in Rory Byrne. Todd was there, and Todd helped to shield Schumacher and everyone else from the Italian media, which is something that we see even right now, where Leclerc is getting bombarded with everything. So what he
Mm.
specifically talks about is Ferrari has to be a non-Italian unit to actually succeed, and it has happened only for 10 years in the last 40 years, and that is arguably the glory period of the team, where it has actually looked like
Mm.
a prominent frontrunner. I mean, even in 17, 18, I thought that Ferrari could challenge, but by mid-season, I knew. Once we reached Singapore, I knew that in both the seasons, 17 and 18, that Ferrari was not going to win. The car was falling back, too
Yeah.
much politics, both seasons, something this and that. and you see it every time. I saw it with Alonso as well. During Alonso, probably they were against probably a better team in Red Bull. The car was better. Vettel rarely made
Mm.
mistakes when he was in that. Vettel's season used to be pretty typical. The first half was a bit dull, and then he used to really pick it up in the second half and completely stretch his legs and develop a gap over everyone else. And
Yeah,
no one used
Hamilton
to
does
catch
that
up.
as well. That's
So
always
yeah,
how
I
Lewis
mean,
has done it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, in the during his Mercedes run, he has done that. Even in 17-18, it was the second half where he was pretty much untouchable. Vettel couldn't keep up, and Lewis also hardly made any mistakes. He would win almost every race, do everything perfectly. So yeah, I mean,
Mm.
anyways, Ferrari is
Yeah.
something, it's a hot topic. Every time one sits and talks about it, there are always 50 to 100 theories of whether Ferrari can succeed. Everyone thinks that Ferrari can succeed, but the thing is, when you try to put a timeline on it, you'll never find anything worth saying. Okay, yeah, it's going to happen now. That's been Ferrari for last 15
Mm.
to 18 years, since 2008 when they last properly challenged and almost won the title. Okay, by the way, talking about teams, what's I think you've also been aware of it. What's your take on the kind of friction that Andretti has been facing when it comes to introduction of an 11 team in Formula One? Where where do you stand on it? I mean, I as a fan, we always want more teams, more spots, more opportunities, but there is this other counter view that these 10 teams have done the bulk of the work to make Formula One what it is right now. And when we talk about it, it's a bit like these 10 teams have become the franchises that have helped Formula One grow into the kind of marketing giant. To be honest, it's currently that it is right now. And when it comes to sharing the pie with the 11 team, they feel the 200 million buyout is just not enough. So that's where it comes down to, in their view. But where do you stand on it?
I mean, I understand that we've had this relative period of stability over the past 10 years, especially of teams, because most teams that have entered Formula One have basically fallen flat on their ass very quickly because they don't have the money
Hmm.
for it or the professionalism or whatever. But this is a serious outfit, Andretti. Like it's not they're not coming in. It's not like Andrea Moda or something, or they're coming in like Virgin
Yeah.
HRT with hardly any money. Like because Haas came into this and they had prepared themselves for years before and they had lots of money behind them and backing. And obviously they're a bit of a meme and a bit of a joke team, but they're still fairly competent, to be honest.
Yeah.
And bigger is better, I think. I've always wanted more teams. I mean, obviously, 2012 we had 24 cars, and that was great. I thought
Yeah.
there's always room for more. So if you want an extra team like Audi or Andretti, then we shouldn't make it too difficult to let them. If they can prove that they're going to actually be competent, I suppose. Because back in the past, they used to just let anyone start a team, pretty
Yeah.
much.
But the thing is, would it be
And particularly if
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, also if they're going to try and portray a bit more of an all-American image than Haas has done, that's an obvious incentive as well because the American market's growing in
Yeah.
that. And Haas are not really an American team in any other than having their headquarters in North Carolina. Like there are other bases in the UK. The cars are Dallara built, Ferrari engines. None of the drivers are American. Guenther's Italian. Like most of the staff are British. It's like it's not really an American team.
Yeah.
Haas.
Gunther is a
Yeah.
very peculiar character, to be honest. The man is Italian, he has an Austrian accent, and and he lives in America, and he's an American national.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's weird. I think he's from South Tyrol, which is like an a German speaking part of Italy, but it used to be part
Yeah.
of Austria or something. But and yeah, he's lived in America because before I forgot he used to be involved in Jaguar before and I think a little bit of Red Bull in their early years before,
Yeah,
and then
he
he was in
was he
America
was
doing NASCAR and stuff.
he was apparently the technical director at Red Bull for the first 2 years, and Newey replaced him.
Yeah, yeah, he was. But he just, I don't think he has the temperament to really run a team, because he's had to put up with a lot, considering all the fiascos they've had with drivers and sponsors and everything else. And he's just such a
Yeah,
hot-headed guy, really. It's amazing he can put up with it and thinks it's worth it, considering
yeah,
they've
he
never
has no
really had.
filter. I mean, that's the
And considering that it's been 7 years and they still haven't even got a podium yet, or a pole position or anything.
pole position they did last season only.
Yeah. Oh, it was a sprint race pole, so it's not really the same.
Oh, come on, it still
But
matters.
yeah,
They'll
but yeah,
take
no,
it.
no
They'll take it
podiums
any
yet
day.
for Haas. Yeah, yeah, they'll take it. Yeah,
Yeah, with Hulkenberg in the team, it's
mm.
not coming any soon. I mean,
No.
the guy repels
Mm.
podium finishes like anything. I mean, I don't know how many P4 finishes he has in his career. But yeah,
I
that's
think he
going
only has
off
about
topic.
4 or 5,
My main
but
concern
it's
is when
more
it
that
comes to the extra team.
the races where he.
Yeah. So my main concern when it comes to the extra having an 11th or 12th team is what are the expectations and what should we expect from a team like Andretti joining? Because I mean, I followed IndyCar very basically giving a cursory glance to the championship standings, and Andretti is not the top runner if I'm not wrong,
Mm,
isn't it? When it comes to the top teams, Andretti does not feature in that. I mean, it's a team that wins a few races every season. That's there. It's competitive, but I don't think it has won a championship in a while. And it's done decently in Formula E. I think it was leading earlier in the season. It won a couple of races. But when we talk about
mm.
a full-fledged Formula One operation, first of all, it's going to take a lot of time. Secondly, the thing is, one of the major issues that usually comes up when you are adding an 11 team is the pie will be cut in 11 parts now. If Andretti comes in, if in future a Panthera or any other team does make a bid or something, I'm not sure how much of a leeway they will have. But at least for now, let's talk about Andretti. If there is an 11 team coming in and you are going to divide the entire revenue into 11 parts, now that 11th part, how much of an increment is going to be contributed by Andretti? I'm not entirely sure if it has that kind of a following that at least on a you know when it comes to adding to the pie, I'm not sure Andretti can add that much. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm probably not as informed, but that's where I stand. Is it going to contribute so much that it gives teams the incentive to have to inculcate someone new into the grid?
Um,
I'm not sure.
I think it can if they know what they're doing. I mean, it depends on money, because doing Formula E and IndyCar, I mean, those are spec series, so that does have an effect on competitiveness and how the team runs. I mean, obviously, IndyCar, they use different engines, but it's the same chassis, and then Formula E is exactly the same. Formula One, of course,
Same
they
chassis, yeah.
own their own.
Hmm.
Yeah, Formula One, they're going to make their own chassis, possibly their own engines, so that gives them so much more freedom in terms of their own design philosophy and development. But if they don't, if they joined and then at the first race, it's like HRT Virgin, they're outside the 107% time and they're like 2 seconds off Williams. It's like, okay, this is not going to happen. But if they join and it's like Haas and they're
Yeah.
around sort of Williams, Alpha Tauri pace, it's like, well, that's that they've obviously they're competitive already, and they're where you'd expect a new team to be in their first season, and so that's kind of promising.
Hmm.
It's
No, no.
and if they can, I
My
think
main
from a
concern is
last.
not around the yeah. My main concern is not around the performance. Performance wise, you can if the whole Cadillac deal is actually real. Performance wise,
Mm,
I really don't expect much of the team to struggle on that front. My main concern is entirely from the business point of view. You're adding 11th team. If it is not bringing
mm.
in as much of a money, then it is going basically it is eating up the share from the other 10 teams. How does a team or how does Formula One compensate for that? That is where I
Okay,
mean
so I think with
I'm
Andretti,
basically
this is where
playing the
again I
devil's
mentioned they.
advocate.
Yeah, I think with Andretti, I mentioned before, this is where they kind of need to lean into kind of the American market. By
Yeah.
having, if they can push that American image and they can promote American drivers, and obviously the team is found named after Mario Andretti. It's controlled by Michael. I don't know if Mario's involved, but obviously he's a legend of motorsport and Formula
Yeah.
One. If they can really lean into that and make it that's what they're catering to, then that's a huge market to have access to and get money and investment, and having like American sponsors and everything else. Because Formula One has never really had. I mean, the number of American drivers is relatively small, and most of those are in the 60s and 70s. But American teams, there have been very few of those as well. It's always been a very Eurocentric sport. And if they can try and change that, that's how they'd make it different. Because if they're just going to set up a factory in Brackley or Milton Keynes or whatever, and just all British staff and everything else, it's like, how is this different from Haas or anyone else? It's just, yeah.
Exactly. But they will apparently they will have a European facility. They'll need to have a European facility.
Yeah,
for sure.
But everyone needs one just for practicality.
It's not going to work without that. Exactly. I mean, yeah. Look, personally, if I had my way, I'd rather have all the 13 slots for the teams filled. More teams is more opportunities, and I mean, every time we see a Formula 2 champion not even getting a slot, then it's not worth it for any. You're missing out on talents, especially even last season when we have Dragovic sitting out. I mean, he had a good season overall, and he won the championship. He should have been in Formula 1, but he can't get through, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And if you have more teams,
that's the lack of seats,
and obviously
which it also is. Yeah, I mean, it's the lack of seats. It also isn't helped that testing just doesn't exist. Like, being a test driver is not a thing anymore. Because when they say, oh, so-and-so is our reserve and development driver for this year, it's like, okay, so what's going to happen is they're going to hang around the paddock, wearing the headphones and smiling at the camera. Maybe they'll get one FP1 session, and then the car breaks down as they exit the pit lane. It's like, what? It needs to go back to the days of, I understand it was done because of budget and money, going back to the days of when you had drivers like Pedro De La Rosa and Alex Wurz and Luca Badoer, who were doing more mileage in the cars than the drivers were, because they were testing endlessly. Like that gives them something to do, and it gives them something useful to do. Like Pietro Fittipaldi, he's been in Haas for like 4 or 5 years now. He's done 2 races, but otherwise he doesn't do anything.
Why is he there, by the way?
And it's like, what's the point of being here?
I mean,
he does IMSA, or he does some other racing just to keep him occupied. But it's like, you're obviously not planning to give him a full-time seat anytime soon. So what's the point of having him there, other than his name? Like, it's just
idea.
When he drove, he was actually all right.
Yeah, I mean, junior categories, he's not that bad. I mean, he's fine.
He didn't do Formula 2. He had a different
F3
trajectory to all the other drivers.
F3,
but like, when he did his 2 races in 2020, he actually did all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's one of those drivers that's like, well, what's the point of having him here if he's not doing anything? And like, Robert Schwartzman, again, is a Ferrari guy who's doing absolutely nothing, and he's never going to get a seat. Yeah, it just needs more teams, and they need to reinvigorate the kind of test driver role.
Yeah.
I
mean, Schwartzman was very impressive. I mean, I found him very impressive in both his Formula 2 seasons. The whole Russia thing, I think it bit him in the ass a bit, because he's not.
He's a victim of all the Russia boycotts and scandal and that. But he's just it is just depressing when you go into Formula 2 season and you think, okay, well, several of these drivers, first of all, they're not going to last the year. The paid drivers are going to get drafted, pushed out, and someone else will come in. But if we're lucky, one driver might get a seat, and there's not even a guarantee it'll be the champion. The rest of them are either going to keep on doing F2 until they run out of money, or they're just going to move on to IndyCar or Formula E, which is just a graveyard for failed F1 drivers, basically. Formula E.
That's what is happening. Other than, I don't get it. Other than Nick De Vries, I don't think I've seen even a single driver come back from Formula E. And to be honest, there have been far more accomplished drivers in Formula E that actually merit a seat in Formula 1. Verne was one of them. Even Van Doon, I don't think he was bad. He was as good as De Vries. Yeah.
I mean, Stoffel Van Dorn is one that could. He was unlucky because he drove for McLaren when they were at their worst, and he had Alonso as his teammate. But he's more than good enough for Formula 1. And then people like Jean-Eric Verne, he got shafted by Red Bull, but he's perfect. Does really well in Formula E. Pascal Wehrlein, he should be in Formula 1 still. And they've all just ended up there.
Exactly.
And then you get the other drivers like Robin Frines or Antonio Felix da Costa, who basically tried and failed to get into F1 and have just stuck in Formula E ever since.
Yeah. Even in IndyCar, there's Christian Lungard. He was pretty good in his first season in F2. He was pretty good. The second season was a bit.
Mm,
It wasn't as good. I think he also came out and said that probably some personal stuff or something happened, and that's why he had to move to IndyCar and start earning. Something happened apparently. He was backed by Alpine as well,
yeah,
so something happened.
it's just yeah, it goes up and down some seasons. There's a lot that I think that there are a lot of things. Formula 2 is not nearly as equal as it looks. I think um, there's a lot of things going on
Yeah,
behind the scenes of money and just the cars and everything. Because obviously Marcus Armstrong and Callum Ilott, they've ended up in IndyCar now as well. When they're well, Callum should have been in Formula One. Marcus, I don't know so much, but they've ended up there. Yuri
Callum,
Vips,
sure.
who, to be honest,
Callum
he
gave Mick as much of a fight as possible.
there's like everyone thought he was going to get that Haas seat instead of bloody Nikita Mazepin. Um, that was the thing, and he should have got that seat, but obviously he didn't. And now
Yeah,
his Formula One is done for him. I think. And to be fair, it sounds like he's enjoying himself
yeah,
in
yeah.
IndyCar a lot. Yeah, and then Yuri
Hmm.
Vips, he shot himself in the foot in many different ways last year, but I think he's trying to get into IndyCar now. But he's one that should have been in Formula One, and Liam Lawson's in Super Formula. He should eventually be in Formula One as well. There's just too many just drivers being wasted, basically.
Yeah, that's where ultimately it comes down to. And the thing is, if you take a look at the Formula 2 grid, there are like 8 cars branded with the Red Bull livery, and they're all from different teams. And the thing that
Yeah, I,
I mean, it's hilarious. What I've never
mm,
understood is out of these 7 or 8 drivers, only one, maximum 1 or 2 is going to make it to Formula One, and everyone else is pretty much getting shafted. There's nothing. They either go to Formula E or
yeah. I
IndyCar.
mean, I have absolutely no idea how Alex Jakes recognizes all the drivers when 8 of them have got Red Bull liveries on, and then the rest of them have got Alpine, and it's like you don't even know which team is which. But yeah, most of them.
Yeah.
I mean, half of the drivers are just there because of money. I mean, if you like Amory Cordial, Brad Benavides, they're never going to be in Formula One. Like at best, they'll
No,
end up in like Ferrari Challenge Europe or something like that.
I
And like
almost
Alessio
fear.
De
I'm
Leda,
almost
he
scared.
like
Somehow,
what are you
somewhere,
doing?
Roy and Nisani to Formula One. I'm almost scared if that happens. He's
Yeah,
he's basically Pastor Maldonado
he's been
without
doing this for
speed.
such a long time. I mean, he's older than most Formula One drivers. He's what 27. Like Ralph Boschung is again. He's been around for ages, but he's actually driving sort of well. But Roy Nissany isn't. That's the thing. He
Yeah,
just doesn't drive well. Like he nearly won a race last year and then crashed in the pit lane or whatever it was. But
yeah,
otherwise, just doesn't. And I don't. I mean, this year it's not the best grid, and it's already all the top drivers have already made several mistakes in the first 3 races or whatever.
yeah.
So
And the thing is, when
I
you look
think it
at this
might
grid,
end.
no, what strikes me is that none of them are your next future champions. None of them.
No, Teo Pulcher and Victor Martins, they're both probably the most competent ones, but I don't see it really so much with them. Because
Yeah,
the thing is, if either of those want, if either of them want to see, yeah, I mean, if either of them want a seat in F1 next year, Teo Pulcher, he's a Sauber driver, so he has to get rid of either Joe or Bottas. Which I
yeah,
mean,
it's
maybe he'll
possible.
get rid of Joe. That's
Yeah,
plausible. But Victor Martins, he's an Alpine driver, so he has to go through either Ocon or Gasly, and that's not happening anytime soon.
yeah. He also
Um,
needs to beat Duhan as well, right? So both Duhan and
yeah,
Martins will be fighting
Doohan's in
for
the
the.
prime spot to be the next one.
Yeah. So either of them is
Yeah,
going to get through.
th-
It's But the thing is, even if they do, when you look at when you look at the Formula 2 seasons when Leclerc was driving, when Russell, Norris, and Albon were there, the,
hmm,
and even when Piastri was there, the kind of competition and the kind of level that these drivers used to show, you don't see it anymore. Any
hmm.
of these drivers,
There was no question. It comes and goes. I think I think we've got a season on our hands similar to 2013 when Fabio Lima was champion, but then the closest he got to being an F1 driver was one FP1 session with Marussia, and that was it. And now he doesn't even
Yeah,
race anymore. And like
yeah,
Davide Valsecchi again, he won it one year, and Giorgio Pantano. But every other
yeah. But
GP2 and F2 champion, to
Versace
be fair, has made
was
it to Formula One.
apparently a Renault Junior, something like that.
Yeah, but then and you had those, but then you did have like really supreme winners in GP2, like Lewis and Nico Rosberg and Hulkenberg and God, even Maldonado, um, who were just obviously ready
Grosjean as
for
well.
it.
Yeah,
And it's just not this year. Yeah, Grosjean's junior career is one of the best of any driver in history. Like it's
yeah.
such a
Him
good
and
junior career. He won so many titles.
both
But
him and Hulkenberg, they are neck and neck. I think they went through the ranks
yeah,
together.
yeah.
And yeah, when you look at it, yeah, Grosjean was rated very highly. I think it's more to do with his mental fortitude, where he kind of lagged a bit and probably fell off. Otherwise, he could have done a lot more in his career.
Yeah, I mean, Grosjean he was like a slightly more polished version of Maldonado in that he had these phases of crashing a lot, but then also being insanely fast.
Yeah,
Um, and it was like, he just didn't crash as often as Maldonado and was often faster than him.
yeah,
It was just sad that even when he was late into his career and a very mature driver, he was still just having these unnecessary accidents, including Bahrain, because that accident was his fault. Like he turned in on Kvyat,
it should
obviously
not
just
have been
without
happening.
looking or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Yeah, there's like
There
a
have been
driver of
far too
his
many.
experience should not be making mistakes like that.
Yeah, it's just it
I mean,
comes down
didn't
to
he
the
crash again
temperament.
in
There
Indy
was
last?
it used to lag
Because
with him.
I watched that race. Like, yeah,
Oh yeah, oh
yeah.
yes. I think it was.
I mean, a week and a half ago or
I think
whatever
he's
it was, he
developed the
crashed
same
in that
reputation
race as
there as
well when
well.
he could have won it. Yeah, and it's like, yes, he just needs to check his mirrors more because he has this classic thing of basically passing a car, not realizing he hasn't completely passed them, and then he turns in on them and they lock wheels. Because that's what happened to
Turns into
Belgium
them.
in
Yeah,
2012
quite a few
when he caused
times.
that nice 5 car pileup at the start.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Maldonado, I think, it just doesn't care at all. Like Maldonado just drives like you're not
He's a
there,
different
or
character.
he drives like
I think
the crash. Yeah,
yeah,
as well as just crashing a lot on his own, he seemed to just deliberately drive into other drivers as well. He's just very hot tempered. And obviously he had
yeah.
Barcelona. He had a few times when he's
His
qualified on the
crash
front row.
with his crash with Lewis in Valencia 2012. He just drove into him or something like that. No, when both were fighting for the podium.
Mm,
I
I
mean,
mean, I've looked at that
it's
one. I think he basically refused to be pushed off the track was the thing, and so both of them were trying to go for the apex, and he could have cut the corner and gone onto the
yeah,
runoff, but he decided to basically just stay on the racing line, and so that left Hamilton. Hamilton had already turned in, so he couldn't go anywhere then.
yeah,
I mean, you can argue he's
yeah.
within his rights to do
Maldonado
so
was a,
because but yeah,
it was it was a racing incident at the end of the day, but he could have avoided it. I mean, if he wanted to, he could have easily avoided it. But the thing is, it was also,
yeah,
I mean, at that point in time, I think Alonso made the statement that Lewis should not be driving this way with someone like Maldonado, who he knows is going to end his race. And that is what happened earlier. In the earlier days, Alonso was the more, he was the more smarter racer who knew which battles he need to pick and
mm,
where he needs to lay off, while Lewis will fight for every position and sometimes end up worse. But yeah, he's also grown and learned in
yeah,
these years. I mean, that's what made the 2012 season from
yeah.
Alonso quite impressive. I mean, yeah, that was like,
Yeah, I mean, all the drivers. I mean, Lewis has said a similar thing with Max, is that you have to
yeah,
drive differently with him. But then he basically said in 2021, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then suddenly they start crashing into each other all the time because neither of them wants to kind of pull
yeah.
off or relent, basically.
I mean, yeah, I almost worry that we won't see any more championship battle between the two. I think Lewis's time is coming to an end. He's not getting a more competitive car, and even if he does, there are drivers that are starting to surge. and we might not get
Mm.
that kind of a battle, or a part two of that rivalry ever again.
Yeah, I think Lewis. I mean, he obviously is at the tail end of his career. I mean, theoretically, if he wanted, he could go on as long as Alonso has. So he could go. He could go for another 4 or 5 years. But he's
Yeah,
not
but the
gonna.
motivation is not
He's
there,
not gonna
no.
want to drive. Yeah,
The
he's not gonna
motivation is
want to
not there
drive an
for Alonso. The
uncompetitive car for that
motivation
long.
has
He's
been
not the
there
kind of person that's
because,
gonna.
yeah, because Alonso, for Alonso, it's been a bit like he's not only hungry, he has been hurt, he has been bitten, he has toiled hard for these many years. Now he has a decent car. He's he's not going to let go of it. If Lewis is driving an Aston Martin for another year, he would easily retire. Alonso won't, because for him that's gold. He's not even fought for podiums
Yeah,
in a decade now. So for him, it's a bit like a bonus that he's going to enjoy as much as he can. Physically, I don't think there's a problem with Lewis. It comes down to the mental
no.
fortitude, that will he be willing to motivate himself to fight in the midfield and do all those things. It's very tough to answer.
Yeah, I mean his racecraft is by and large as good as it's ever been. It's just that the cracks in his driving are showing because he's no longer in the fastest car and he's having to fight harder, and that's making him make
Yeah,
more mistakes. And it's also showing in his motivation because he's in a unique position that I don't think any driver other than maybe say Fangio in the 50s has had such a sustained period of having such good cars behind them. Lewis has never
yeah,
had to have a whole season driving in a midfield car that can't get
mm,
anywhere near podiums, let alone wins. Um, and
yeah,
he even when even when he has been at the front and he's been running in second or third, he still will complain over the radio. He's someone who obviously doesn't like losing. No driver does, but he's obviously just
yeah.
very accustomed to winning a lot more. And as well as that, he has so many passions and interests outside of Formula One that he might just decide to call it quit and go and do that instead. I don't think he's like someone
Yeah.
like Kimi Raikkonen, where he's like, well, I may as well keep going because I've got nothing else to do or whatever.
I mean, the question is, will he be paid 1 million a week in anything else he does? That's where the question comes up, because the kind of
It
money he's
depends
being paid by
if he
Mercedes,
thinks he needs the money.
everyone
I mean,
needs the
obviously, yeah, he
money.
gets paid a ridiculous.
Everyone needs the money. No
Yeah,
one is going to
I
say
mean,
no to that kind of money.
no one's going to say. I mean, obviously, part of his image is he's someone who obviously is very charitable and he's
Yeah.
conscious of how privileged he is and the fortunate position he's in. But yeah, he's always going to be tempted over by that. Although I don't think he's a very um, I don't think he has a particularly expensive lifestyle necessarily. That he's just
Are
suddenly
you
going to
kidding
run out of
me?
money.
Have you looked at the kind of clothes and the
But
kind of
yeah, there's
accessories he carries?
yeah,
Arguably,
yeah. I mean, I suppose he travels a lot, but he's not. He doesn't
I
like own
mean,
an
on
airline,
the
and he's
entire
not
grid,
having
I
yacht
don't think
parties
there's
all the time,
anyone.
and that kind of thing.
Probably, yeah.
But I don't know. Obviously, he's got several. He's got. I mean, he's got several houses in different countries, which are all very nice and that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't. We'll have to see.
Yeah, but drivers
I
can
think
afford it.
he's
They're all, I mean,
yeah. Well, they can
they're all
afford
filthy rich
anything. I mean, even
drivers.
the ones that are on 200 grand a year, it's like that's you're set up pretty nice with that.
No one is though. The minimum I think I saw was
Yeah.
around 3 to 4 million, and apparently it was George Russell that had that kind of salary, of base salary. After that, he got
Yeah,
those.
I think sometimes the back like maybe not this year. I don't know. I don't know what I mean. Logan Sargent maybe has a smaller salary probably of the lot, but
Yeah, probably a
like
million
Vettel
or
when he first
500K.
start. I mean, yeah, because yeah, something like that. Because when I mean, for example, when Vettel first started, he was on about 300k when he was at Toro Rosso, and I think Lewis was on when in his first year McLaren, he wasn't on very much. It was only
Yeah,
about
it
half a
wasn't.
million, but then there was an extra like
It
ten
was
thousand
basically
pound
a
bonus for
development
every
deal that
point.
was. Yeah,
Yeah, he was on like half a million, but then Alonso was on like 30 million. But
yeah,
then Lewis would get
yeah.
like a 10k
It
bonus for
wasn't
every
big.
point he scored or something.
By the way, talking about
Mm.
that season 2005, 2006, 7, something like that. Coming to
Hmm.
the final topic that I've actually wanted to talk to you about, Narain Karthikeyan and HRT. What's your fascination with both of them? First, let's talk about HRT. Then we'll get to Narain Karthikeyan.
Okay, so this goes back to why I actually started my channel. So obviously everyone loves a back marker, and I in 2011 and 2012 I went to the British Grand Prix, and one of the big novelties of going to a live race is that you get equal coverage of every car and every driver because obviously they all have to pass you one lap. And at that point, I was already very intrigued in what Lotus, Virgin, and HRT were doing. And I was like, this is fantastic because I can actually see them racing other than just seeing them when either they crash or get lapped. And so I remember watching Caterham, Virgin, Marussia, and HRT 2012. Petrol didn't start the race, but Caterham, Kovalainen just stormed off on his own, and then Marussia and HRT were close together. And as the race went on, they spread out, and then they start getting lapped, and you lose track. And I thought, well, this is very interesting. And so that several years down the line, that was when I got the genesis for my first video. When I was looking at those three teams, and saying, well, actually, let's just see these races that everyone remembers for what happens at the front, but let's just show it from their perspective, and how competitive were they, and that, because you would see in, for example, the timings for races, you would see at the back, like 18th and 19th, there's like 40 seconds between them. And it's like, that's a massive gap. How is it that big just between the two slowest cars on the grid? And you wonder what's causing it to be that big. And a lot of the time it's blue flags and everything. And HRT particularly, because they were the slowest of the three, and because they kind of faltered first, and that it was that kind of caught my attention. And they had very pretty cars, but also as well, this then leads into Karthikeyan, because they were the slowest team and he was the slowest driver, so he was the ultimate underdog, because he just. I mean, obviously, you have to be of a certain standard to get to Formula One, and his junior career was a pretty good one by and large. I mean, he won races in British Formula 3, and he's one of Carlin's most successful drivers, I think, actually. And he was doing Euro, what was it called? Euro Open by Nissan, or whatever that was. And yeah, I didn't watch 2005. So when I started getting into F1, I knew his name because I saw the driver list 2005, and I was like, oh, an Indian driver, that's a bit different then. But I didn't pay a huge amount of attention to Jordan and that, other than the fact that he was one of the 6 drivers that started Indianapolis. But then suddenly he comes back in 2011, which I think surprised a lot of people, including myself, because I thought that wasn't someone I was expecting to come back to Formula One. And obviously now I realise the main reason is because he had very generous funding from the Tata Group, who were giving something like $8 or $9 million to HRT in sponsorship. So that was that he was basically a pay driver. And it was mostly just about marker, but against De La Rosa, he outqualified him only 3 times the whole season. And he only beat him in a race once, but that was Malaysia, where he then got penalised for giving Vettel a puncture. And he did seem to have problems with blue flags and whatnot. But yeah, he was just an interesting. I was sitting there wanting him to succeed and wanting HRT to have a clean race where they could beat like Marussia or Caterham, and they almost did. Like at Canada 2012, they were faster than Marussia, but then both their brakes went within like 2 laps of each other or something, which I think is a bit of a conspiracy that I've got coming in the iceberg. And yeah, I just find those cars interesting because, I mean, this is the thing. As of us recording this, Karthikeyan, he's actually doing an AMA on Reddit tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I've got a few questions about HRT I'm going to ask, because I just want to know, like, they're one of the last like proper backmarker teams. Like HRT, they're one of the worst teams in Formula One. And I just want to know, is like what was so wrong with the car that meant that it was 4 or 5 seconds off? Like, was it just no downforce? Obviously there was no KERS, but what was it like to drive? I think he himself said, because he was a test driver for Williams, he couldn't believe how different Williams was from Jordan. And this is when Williams was just a midfield team as well.
2006, right? After his first year in 2005 with Jordan.
Yeah, he spent 2 years testing with Williams as a test driver and did quite a lot of mileage. Actually,
you might not even believe he was in contention for the seat that Rosberg ultimately got in 2006 at Williams. It was supposed to be him, Pizzonia, and Rosberg. It was a battle between these.
I think his testing times were very good, apparently. And so he nearly got it.
Yeah. But Rosberg was the reigning GP2 champion, and he had a lot of hype as well. So he got through. Plus, he
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, it should obviously. Had he gone to Williams in 2000, I mean, that would have been a disastrous year because the car's raw speed was really good, but that car just broke down so much.
far too
There were
much.
several races where Webber was running on the podiums and then the exhaust blew up or
Yeah,
something, and then also Rosberg himself was crashing out all the time. I mean, so that's one
yeah.
of Williams' worst seasons in their history, 2006. So he could have scored a couple of points, but it wouldn't have been a breakthrough year necessarily. He probably would have then been
I mean,
dropped
yeah, exactly.
after 2006. Um,
Yeah, but the thing is, he was already, I
yeah, but
think,
HR. I
31,
mean, he
32
had
by
the thing
that
is
time.
at HR. I know that's the thing. When he came back in 2011, he was born in
So
1977,
he
so
was
he was
38
34
or
already
37.
when he joined.
Oh, he was 34. I think he debuted at 31, if I'm not wrong. Or maybe it was
He
29 or
was
30, something like that.
28. He was 28 when he joined Jordan in 2005.
Okay, 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 okay. So we should
So
be
already
34,
quite
35.
old.
Yeah, got it.
He had a very long junior career. He was racing in single seaters for 12
Yeah,
years, which is quite
yeah.
long. Um,
The thing is, I think he
but
talked about it in
so he was already fairly old.
yeah, exactly. And he talked
Yeah.
about it because when it comes to India, Narain Karthikeyan is the guy that actually broke the glass ceiling in terms of getting into Formula One. He was the first guy. And
Mm,
I think in terms of raw speed, even until now, I think he has been the best that we've had. Even though now Jehan Daruwala is doing a decent job. Karun Chandok won a few GP2 races. He also got through in Formula One. And apparently Kushmine is also decent. He looks decent. He already got a podium in Australia.
mm,
But in terms of raw speed and someone who has been even I think when Jensen Button talked about him quite a bit, that Naren Karthikeyan was doing quite well when he was against him in F3. I think he was. I think he also talked about he was in Carlin, British in the British F3. So he won a few races, and even then he impressed quite a few people. But that was in 2000, and by the time he made his debut, it was in 2005. So those 5 years in
mm.
Nissan series or something he was doing in Japan. It
Yeah.
it's not the perfect trajectory to make it to Formula One, and that's where at the end of the day, if you don't have the funding or the backing, you're not going to make it. That kind of plays a role. By the time Tata woke up,
Yeah.
Narain was basically past his prime.
Yeah. I think because he nearly got. The year before that, he almost got a seat with Minardi for 2004. But again, it's Minardi. That would have been even worse than Jordan.
Yeah,
But in 2005 itself, the
yeah,
first half of the season was very strong because he was by and large faster than Montero, and much faster than and that. But then in the second half of the season, Montero caught up with him and started beating him, and he fell behind. And I think his testing times were quite good, and he was quite good in testing. But I think it was mostly just his racecraft where the problems were, because as I said before, you had things like giving Vettel the puncture, blocking drivers in qualifying, and then
the
to
whole cucumber thing. Yeah,
Canada 2011 was one of his best drives because it was in the wet, and he finished 14th on track, and he'd passed both Marushas at the end, but he cut the chicane passing them, and so then he got penalised and was classified last again. And obviously, Malaysia before the puncture, he
yeah,
got himself up to sixth. I mean, admittedly, they started on the full wet tires, but like he was miles ahead
yeah.
of De La Rosa, who'd started on those as well, and he was just keeping up the pace
Yeah.
reasonably well until it dried out. Um, but when it came to I mean, when against De La Rosa particularly, obviously De La Rosa was a very experienced driver, and he had been either racing or testing in F1 continuously since 1998. Um, and
Yeah,
there were just constant. I think it was not an easy car to drive, the HRT, and it was just, and he had problems with getting the
yeah.
tires up to temperature. The brakes were getting too hot, and stuff like that. So maybe if he'd been put in a
Yeah.
midfield car, he might have been okay. But it was just, yeah, not the best cars really, and he was just a bit
It
late in
was a fun.
his career.
Yeah. I mean, okay. I don't think. I think you might even be aware of it. 2000. The first Indian Grand Prix was in 2011. I think so. and he
2011.
yeah, and he beat his teammate in that race. You know you know who his
Hmm.
teammate was? You should be aware.
Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean it's yeah. I mean,
and when you think
I
of it,
can't really. The thing is, he was helped by that race specifically. I think he outqualified. I think he did beat him in qualifying, but then he got because he blocked someone, he got sent to the back row. But then so did Ricardo. Ricardo had to do an extra stop for like a loose wheel, but
yeah,
otherwise he was there or
yeah.
thereabouts on pace. He was closer than he had been against Liuzzi. And then again in 2012,
Oh
he
yeah.
was only 1,000th behind Della Rosa in qualifying,
Oh
which is
yeah.
by far the closest he'd been to him.
I mean,
Um,
yeah, that was his
yeah, I
glory
mean,
moment, to be honest. And when he came to, I mean, he talked about it. I mean, I was a child at that stage, so we used to keep an eye on it,
mm,
and he talked about it that driving in an Indian car, not an Indian car, unfortunately, was driven by someone else. An Indian driving in the Indian Grand Prix.
mm,
I think that's the best that I could do in my career, especially from where we started. So yeah, on that point in time, that was his glory moment, and he was very
yeah.
happy about it.
I, I mean, he obviously because he got that and Chandok didn't
Yeah,
because Chandok
Chandak was
he
supposed to
was
drive for
Lotus's third drive in
Lotus.
2011.
Yeah,
But they just decided not to let him. So he drove in. He drove in FP1,
yeah,
but they didn't let him race, which I think was a little unfair.
yeah.
They should have at least let him have that. That would have been huge to have two Indian drivers on the grid.
Would have
Um,
been awesome.
and
I mean,
it
yeah.
was well
Look, the
set
thing
up
is,
as
at
a
the
race
end of the
because
day,
the circuit is like the circuit is brilliant. I
it's a
think, and it
basic
looks. I mean,
tiltrodrome.
but and the
Most of the
attendance was
ones are
good.
same. Yeah. No, the
Yeah, I mean, this one it was.
yeah.
I thought it was good because it was really wide, that massive long straight, lots of sweeping turns. It's just the races were just not that good, and Vettel won all three of them, and that. Um,
The biggest issue was it was during the.
but they
I
built a
think
good circuit, I think.
yeah, the circuit was fine. The timing of the race was poor. To be honest, it should not be in October. It should be maximum in September, because the weather kind of gets a bit gloomy during that time. The organizers did not take care of that thing. Then of course there was this whole taxation thing, the Indian government and the probably something related to the entertainment tax that needed to be applied, that played a role. Then the bigger thing was that
Mm.
because of the kind of season that we were having in 2013, where it was a bit of a dud, so the marketing was not really there, because by the time we reached India, the I think Vettel had already sealed the championship. No, no, Vettel sealed the championship in India, right?
He sealed the
His
championship
fourth
in
championship.
India. So yeah,
Yeah, and by then, but it was known that he was going to win it. It was going to be very, very
mm.
academic in terms of no competition or anything. So that kind of killed the interest, because
And obviously yeah, Karthikeyan was gone, Chandok was gone
yeah,
as well. It was just yeah,
yeah. So it didn't really didn't do much for the. I mean, just imagine the 2021 season in India. It would have been awesome. I mean, that is the kind of seasons when they can actually explore basically new areas. Like for instance, they went to Turkey in 2021. I mean, that's a piss poor track where you can't even have. I mean, the track is awesome. There's nothing wrong with it, but the
but
location
the
is
it's in the
just
middle of nowhere. Attendance has
ju-
always been rubbish. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
and that is a big issue. And that is always going to be.
whereas this is
It's a.
whereas
It's
Bud
not
is
in
in a really good accessible location.
sort of. It's a bit like it's an hour's drive for me, to be honest. And this year we'll have this thing, the MotoGP races in India, no? So I'll probably go and cover.
Mm,
So I was just hoping.
mm,
I mean, for an Indian fan, what we hope is that the whole event is a success that we have in September this season, this year with the MotoGP. Because if that happens, then
mm.
let's hope Formula One can come back. But it comes down to the fact that we should have a good championship. If there is a good championship, only then people will be interested. At least the new
Yeah,
demographies, they will only be interested, because 2011 was a peak season. When that season ended, there were people that were burning crackers here. When the whole ending, when Max won, I actually heard crackers where people were celebrating, and I didn't know that Formula One had that kind of following here, but apparently it did. That season was, it caught everyone's eye, and we need a few seasons like that, not single team winning everything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, 2021 was just a hit
Yeah.
everywhere. To be honest, even in Britain, it was a big thing. I mean, they
So
they they broadcast Abu Dhabi live because they just knew everyone wanted to see it. Which, yeah, and there is a case
yeah,
to be made to bring Indian Grand Prix back. I mean, with the junior drivers, like Jay Daruvula, he's basically said he's turning his attention towards Formula E. So I think he's given up on Formula One. And yeah,
he
Kush
has
Miney's
to.
doing not bad at the moment. But then his brother Arjun Miney, he did F2, but he's doing Le Mans now or something. And I
Yeah, he's
think that
in,
the
I
less the
think,
less said about
DTM. Yeah, yeah. What the hell happened with Arjun Mane? I don't know.
he did Asian Le Mans. He did the Asian Le Mans series with Narain last year, I think, or the year before.
Yeah,
But yeah, and the less said about Mahavir Raghunathan, the better, I think. But yeah,
but that's. I
there
mean,
are there
yeah, he
is
he ruined it for everyone.
there's more. Yeah, he's. I mean, there are more Indian drivers than you would expect. If you obviously it's a massive country, but China has produced one driver, but India's already got two, and there's ones in the works. Whereas China doesn't have. There aren't any Chinese drivers in any of the feeder series that I know of, and that. And
No, no, they aren't.
it's just a
The
market.
culture is not there.
It's just about the market, and
That's the
I
whole
suppose
thing.
the
The culture is
automotive
not
and
there.
yeah, and I think that's the same with India because Formula One is a very westernized, very Eurocentric sport, and most of the teams and drivers come from Europe, and that's where a lot of the big manufacturers are. And then you have outliers like Japan, which has a massive automotive industry and has produced about over 20 drivers now. And Honda and Toyota, they've all been involved in Formula
Yeah.
One, but India doesn't have a large automotive industry, and it has a domestic
Yeah.
racing scene, but it just doesn't break
No, no.
out in the way that Japan has.
The issue with India, not only India, I think the issue with Formula One in general, even racing in general, is it's the amount of money involved. And
Mm,
look, for a normal aspiring kid, Formula One is not an option. It will never be an option. Even for the richest of the richest, all of these guys, Karun Chandok comes from a racing fraternity. His father, Vicky Chandok, he belongs in the same. I think he was something Indian. He was some president or something from the Indian Motorsport Council or something. He used to
hmm
be part of that. Um,
Yeah.
the Both Arjun Maini and Kush Maini, they belong to very well-off families, and they've been funded excessively by them. Then Jehan Daruwala, his father is, I think, one of the richest people in India. The family that he belongs to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when
Yeah.
you have
I mean, yeah. Narain's father
Mahavir
was an
Raghunathan, I don't
Indian
know from
rally
where he came.
champion, I think.
Yeah, Narain
Yeah,
again. He
for Narain Karthikeyan. Yeah.
exactly, and he has the same legacy that he has carried on. In India, Formula One does not have that kind of a following. To be fair, and even if one does, you, you really don't have the kind of avenues. There's no karting tracks where I stay. Very rarely you'll find karting tracks in places that are in the southern part of the country, which are even not accessible for everyone. So when you take
hmm
all these things into consideration, I mean, that was what Naren talked about, that there is no karting scene in India. And for people like you talk about Lewis Hamilton, Max
Mm.
Verstappen, they started karting at the age of 3 to 4 years old. In India, they don't even start by 11 to 12 years. So that's a major gap, and it
Yeah.
takes a lot of time to
I th-
fill it.
I don't think I don't know if Narain did karting at
No, he
all
didn't.
actually,
Single
because
seater.
he I think yeah, he started in Formula Maruti, I think it's called, and when he was like 12 years
Yeah,
old or something.
yeah, exactly.
So very late. I mean, by modern standards, that's really late. That's not too late by the standards of the 80s. But yeah, it's just I think, and when it comes to sport in India, most kids are going to think cricket first
Cricket
if
is
they
the
want to
way.
be an athlete rather than motor
Yeah,
racing, and it's just because it's part of the culture.
obviously. Yeah. Plus, it's
And yeah, but
easy.
even in
The
the
thing is,
UK and
it's
Western
very
countries,
easy.
it's just getting too expensive anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same here. Like football is cheap and accessible, and so anyone. That's why you get so many working class kids who become professional footballers. But motor racing,
Exactly.
Lewis and Vettel are two of the last drivers who were able to make it when you could come from a middle or working class family. But now,
Hulkenberg is
basically every driver in Formula
Hulkenberg
2
is
and
from the
Formula 3,
same
their dad
family.
is a millionaire. Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously Ocon lives in a caravan, but
Yeah.
everyone else, their dad's a
Ocon's
millionaire
story
or
is so
billionaire, or
heart
their dad
touching.
used to be a
Every
racing
time,
driver, so that's how they do it.
yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
when it comes to Ocon, I think in Beyond the Grid, he talked about his story where he said that for me, the objective was clear. If I don't win the championship this season, I will not be racing next year. It was as simple as that for him. And that
Hmm.
is how he progressed every year on year. And he said one of the more frustrating parts of his career was when he won the F3 championship. Max was third, and Max was in Formula One the next season, and he had nothing to
Hmm.
do. And he had to go make a parallel switch to and
Yeah.
go to GP3. And he won that title, and even then he had nothing to do. F2 was, I think he went to DTM or something, and then got into Formula One. Something like this happened in his case. No money.
Yeah.
That's
It's
he
just
didn't do F2
some
because he didn't
drivers
have
have it so
money.
much harder than others, I think. Yeah, and this
Yeah.
is where you see the sort of journeyman like Roy Nassani, where it's like, oh well, if I don't win the championship, I've got enough money to just go again next year. Like that's fine, we'll just do it again.
Yeah.
Um, and you get some. I mean, like drivers like Lando, for example, he's not a pay. No one had ever described him as a pay driver, but his dad is a multimillionaire. That's smoothened his
I
career
think one of the
trajectory
top
way more
10
than it.
richest people from Wales, right? Something like that. His father is one of the
His
top
dad,
10 richest people.
he's ranked in the top 250 richest people in the country. He's got a net worth of like 200 million pounds.
Jesus.
Lando's dad, and so obviously Lando is supremely talented, and he has a really, really good
Yeah.
career record. But he's always been able to afford the best karts, the best mechanics, and he's never had to.
And
He's
the
never
best
had needed
support.
sponsorship. So that's been able to smoothen his career very well. And obviously,
Yeah.
Lewis, he did struggle in the first few years, but very early on, he got picked up by McLaren, and that was him sorted. And Vettel, again, his dad was a scaffolder, and then he got picked up by Red Bull when was like
Yeah.
12 or 13. And it's
Yeah, I think even in
you
his
just
case
have
that
to
happened.
be in the
I
right
think
place in the right
Hulkenberg's
time.
story, I don't remember what happened with him. I think he was picked up by Michael Schumacher's manager or something, Willy Weber. I think he picked him up and basically managed his career throughout. Something like this.
Willy Weber, that's yeah,
Yeah. So he
that
picked
was
him up.
something like that, yeah. And then you
Anyhow,
get
wow, how long have we
and then yeah,
we've been going on
well
for
over
more
two
than two
hours, yeah,
hours, by the way, Peter.
yeah, yeah. So
That's
much for
way
keeping
beyond
it
what I
under
had
an
actually
hour, yeah,
targeted before we started. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyhow, I hope you had fun. I mean, that's the first thing that I try to keep in mind when we are doing something like this. Um, by the way, thanks for covering all the five topics. Everything was covered.
Yep.
I think more than extensively that even I would have hoped for. But yeah, it was fun for me. I hope
Hmm.
you had a good time.
I did, yeah. It was good fun, good chat.
Yeah. By the way, where can anyone else reach out to you? Your social media handles or something?
So social media, I'm on. My channel is just Peter Brook, and then I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. It's at Brook underscore F1.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll share all these links in the description. So anyone, if they want to reach out, subscribe to Peter's channel, they can do that. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for helping me record the second edition of the Casual F1 podcast. Thanks for coming. Thanks, guys. I hope you like the extended version of the podcast. It's a good chat. We had quite a few things to talk about, quite a few segues that I didn't expect, but still it was a fun chat. I hope you guys enjoy it. Drop a like, do subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.